Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. I was driving home after a long day at work, the streets empty and quiet except for the hum of my engine. It was late, well past midnight, and the headlights of oncoming cars were few and far between. I glanced in my rearview mirror and noticed a car trailing me at a distance, not unusual for the time of night. At first, I thought it was just coincidence, but after a few turns, the car stayed behind me, never veering off, its headlights a constant presence in my mirror. I made another turn onto a street I rarely used, hoping to shake off the car following me. But when I glanced again, the headlights were still there, right behind me. My heart began to race. I could feel the pressure of being watched, the suffocating sensation of not being alone on a road I thought I knew so well. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it just a coincidence, or was this someone who had been following me for a while? I decided to take another turn, this time heading down a narrow alley that led to the back of a shopping center. The car followed, its headlights never dimming. My palms were sweating on the steering wheel, and I could feel my breath becoming shallow. I glanced at the clock. It was already 1:30 a.m. The streets were deserted, and the city felt eerily still. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. What if I wasn't just imagining things? What if someone was actually following me? With each turn, I tried to stay calm, hoping that if I drove in circles, I could lose the car. But no matter what I did, it stuck to me like glue. The headlights seemed closer now, brighter in the mirror. I felt like I was being herded into some sort of trap. My anxiety grew, and 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Should I call the police? But would they even get here in time? I couldn't risk pulling over and waiting for them, not with the stranger behind me. As I neared a more populated area, I made a snap decision. I wasn't going to let this go on any longer. I sped up, heading for the nearest police station. It was a few miles away, but it felt like a lifetime as I drove, constantly checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see the car getting closer. The headlights remained right behind me, their glow unwavering, and I could feel the tension building in my chest with each passing second. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of the police station, my heart was pounding in my ears. I could feel the adrenaline surging through me, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The police station was brightly lit, and I hoped that if I parked there, the car would have no choice but to leave. I pulled into an empty spot, the engine of my car still idling, and glanced at the rearview mirror once more. To my shock, the car didn't stop behind me. It didn't slow down at all. The headlights dimmed slightly, and the car sped off down the road, disappearing into the distance as quickly as it had appeared. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The car, the strange sensation of being followed, it all seemed unreal. Was I just paranoid? Or had someone really been tracking my every move? I took a deep breath and got out of the car, my legs still trembling slightly as I walked toward the station. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped something. I entered the lobby, greeted by the officer behind the desk, and tried to calm my racing thoughts. I explained the situation, telling him how the car had followed me for miles, never turning off, staying right behind me no matter what I did. The officer listened attentively, his expression serious. "It sounds like you did the right thing, driving straight to the station," he said. "But honestly, we can't track anything without more details." His tone was reassuring, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. He made a note in his log and suggested I report it the next time I felt unsafe or noticed the car again. But as I stood there, I couldn't help but feel that something more sinister was at play. The whole situation had felt too deliberate, too precise. It wasn't just a random encounter, it was as though someone was watching me. I thanked the officer and left, my mind still spinning. I drove home in silence, the streets now feeling far too empty. The headlights from the car I had been followed by had vanished, but the lingering sense of unease stuck with me. I couldn't shake the image of the headlights in my rearview mirror, following me like some dark shadow. I hadn't realized until now how vulnerable I had felt, how easily someone could have snatched me away without anyone noticing. When I finally got home, I locked all the doors and checked every window, though I knew it wouldn't help. The incident had left me on edge, and even the comfort of my familiar surroundings felt hollow. I sat in the living room, replaying the events in my mind. How had the car followed me so persistently, never breaking off even once? Why had it stopped when I pulled into the police station, only to disappear like that? I didn't have any answers, and I didn't sleep that night. My mind wouldn't let me forget the feeling of being pursued, the knowledge that someone for reasons unknown had been tracking my every move. It was a thought that haunted me for weeks after, and even though the car never appeared again, I couldn't shake the fear that one day it might, that I might be watched again, and next time I might not have the chance to escape. Story 2. I was at a gas station during a long road trip, feeling the fatigue settling in after hours on the highway. The rest stop was quiet, almost too quiet, but I was grateful to stretch my legs for a moment. I made my way inside the building, heading straight for the public restroom at the back. The door to the men's room creaked as it opened, the faint smell of cleaning supplies lingering in the air. I entered one of the stalls, locking the door behind me, and let out a deep sigh. I hadn't realized how badly I needed a break until I sat down. The sound of my breathing echoed in the small, sterile space, and for a moment I felt a slight sense of relief. The trip had been long and uneventful, but there was a nagging feeling at the back of my mind, something I couldn't quite place. Just as I started to relax, I heard the door to the restroom open. A faint shuffle of footsteps entered, and the sound of the door clicking shut followed. I didn't think much of it at first. There were always people coming and going at these stops. But then, something felt off. The footsteps didn't move past the stalls. Instead, they stopped right outside mine. I tensed, waiting for the person to move on, but they didn't. I shifted uncomfortably, wondering if maybe the person was just waiting for the stall next to mine. The silence stretched on, and I could feel the tension building in the air. Whoever was out there hadn't moved a single inch. My thoughts started to race. Was it a prank? Someone trying to scare me? But I couldn't bring myself to peek out of the stall. Not yet. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just standing there for a moment. But the stillness was unnerving. The person's feet remained planted outside my stall, unmoving. I could see their shoes beneath the gap at the bottom of the door, just barely, and I focused on them, hoping the person would move or leave. But nothing happened. My anxiety began to spike, and I pressed my back against the cold, tiled wall, my breath shallow. Minutes passed, though it felt like an eternity. My mind raced through all the worst-case scenarios. Maybe the person was waiting for me to make a sound so they could confront me. Or worse, they were waiting for me to leave so they could follow me. I had never felt so exposed, trapped in a small, enclosed space with no escape. I wasn't sure how long I'd been sitting there, but the silence was suffocating, almost oppressive. I couldn't hear the person breathing or shifting. It was as if they were holding their breath, just waiting. I glanced down at the shoes again, trying to gauge if they were still there. They hadn't moved. I felt a cold sweat form on the back of my neck, and my palms began to feel clammy. There were no other sounds, no footsteps, no voices, just the rhythmic beat of my own heart pounding in my chest. It felt like the world outside the restroom had disappeared, leaving just the two of us in that quiet space. I tried to focus, to calm myself. Maybe I was overreacting. It wasn't unusual for people to pause in the bathroom, right? But something about the stillness of the situation felt wrong. Why hadn't the person just used a different stall or left? I was sure I wasn't imagining it. The longer I sat there, the more it felt like the person outside was intentionally waiting for me, watching me. I looked at the small crack between the door and the stall, my heart racing faster as I debated whether to risk a glance. I didn't want to look, but I also needed to know if the person was still there. I slowly leaned forward, inching my head closer to the crack, just enough to catch a glimpse of the person's feet. I froze as soon as I saw them. They hadn't moved at all. I could see their shoes still planted firmly in place, like they were waiting for something, or someone. Brr. The fear that had been building inside me suddenly hit me with full force. I couldn't stay in the stall much longer. I had to leave, but I didn't know if it was safe. If the person was waiting for me, I wasn't sure what would happen if I walked out. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. Should I try to leave quietly, or should I make noise to alert them that I was aware of their presence? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I reached for the handle of the stall door, my hand trembling slightly. I had to move. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest that it almost drowned out the sound of my breathing. I cautiously turned the handle, holding my breath as I slowly pushed the door open just a crack. I didn't want to make a sound, but the door creaked slightly in protest. I peered out, hoping to catch sight of the person standing there, but all I saw were their shoes. They were still there, planted firmly on the floor just outside the stall. I was paralyzed, unable to make a move, unsure what to do next. I could feel my heart beat in my throat, my hands growing cold and clammy. I wanted to bolt from the restroom, but I knew I couldn't do it without knowing what I was up against. The minutes stretched on in agonizing silence, each one feeling like an hour. Then, suddenly I heard a sound from the hallway outside. The door to the restroom opened again, and the footsteps of someone else entered. The person standing outside my stall didn't move. The new person's footsteps grew louder, and the first person still standing there shifted just slightly, as if finally breaking the silence. Without thinking, I pushed the stall door open fully, rushed out, and bolted for the exit, not daring to look back. My heart was racing as I ran through the corridor and out of the building, the cool night air feeling like a shock to my system. I didn't stop until I was in my car, safe inside, but the image of those unmoving feet stayed with me, haunting my thoughts. Story 3. I had been working late at the office, and the drive home felt like an eternity. The quiet of the night was only broken by the hum of my car's engine and the occasional passing headlights. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was well past midnight. The streetlights above seemed dim, their glow faint against the blackened sky. I wasn't expecting any surprises. The day had already been long enough. As I fumbled with my keys to unlock the front door, I noticed something off. The door didn't feel right. It wasn't locked. I always double-check it before leaving. My heart skipped a beat as I pushed the door open, hoping it was just a mistake on my part. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I'd never forgotten to lock the door. I stepped inside cautiously, my senses immediately on high alert. Everything seemed to be in its place, no signs of forced entry, nothing out of the ordinary. The living room looked the same as when I left. My shoes were still neatly placed by the door, the couch undisturbed. The silence was suffocating, almost too quiet. But there was something in the air, a subtle tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I locked the door behind me, my movements slow as I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. I scanned the house again, checking the kitchen and hallway, but still, there was nothing out of place. No open drawers or broken glass, no signs of someone having gone through my things. Yet the atmosphere felt wrong, like an invisible presence lingered in the air. I walked through the room slowly, as if expecting something to jump out at me. The kitchen light flickered overhead as I passed, casting strange shadows along the walls. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than usual, like it was the only sound in the house. But it wasn't the noise that bothered me. It was the feeling like someone had just been there, like they were still watching from the corners of the room. I reached my bedroom and the door creaked as I pushed it open. The room appeared untouched, yet the air was heavier in here, more suffocating. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn as they always were. I walked over to the window and peered outside, but there was nothing, just the empty street. No sign of anyone, no movement. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe, steadying myself. I convinced myself it was just the late hour, that my mind was playing tricks on me. It had been a long day and the fatigue was starting to take its toll. Maybe I was just imagining things, but no matter how hard I tried to dismiss the feeling, it wouldn't go away. It felt like something had been inside, like someone had entered and left without a trace. I kept replaying the door in my mind, wondering if I had really forgotten to lock it, or if someone had been waiting for me. I stood up, pacing around the room. My thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. There was no clear explanation, but my instincts told me I wasn't alone. The house felt too still, too quiet. I reached for my phone, considering calling a friend or even the police. But what would I say? There was nothing tangible to point to. No evidence of a break-in, no signs of anything. Just a feeling, a strong, overwhelming sense that something was off. As I made my way back to the living room, I checked the windows and locks again. Everything seemed secure. The curtains were drawn tightly, the blinds in place. Still, that strange, suffocating feeling lingered. I sat down on the couch and tried to relax, but the discomfort wouldn't leave. I glanced around, searching for something, anything that could explain the eerie atmosphere of my own home. The phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me out of my thoughts. I pulled it out, and my eyes immediately scanned the screen. It was just a message from my friend, nothing alarming, just to check in. But something about the timing felt off. The message read, "How's everything? All good at home?" I couldn't help but wonder if she somehow knew something was wrong, if she was sensing what I couldn't quite articulate. I put the phone down, my gaze drifting back to the front door. It was locked now, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that someone had been inside. I walked over to the door again, inspecting the frame for any signs of damage. There was nothing, no scuff marks or scratches. But as I ran my hand along the door's surface, I noticed something strange, a faint indentation near the doorknob, almost like a fingerprint. My stomach turned. It wasn't deep enough to leave a permanent mark, but it was enough to make me wonder. I backed away from the door, feeling suddenly very small in the empty house. The weight of the silence was pressing in, making it hard to breathe. I thought about going outside to check the yard, but I hesitated. What if someone was still out there? What if I wasn't as alone as I thought? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. The thought of stepping outside into the dark, unknown night felt like a bad idea. I decided to sleep with the lights on that night, something I hadn't done in years. As I lay in bed, the room felt colder than usual, and every sound seemed amplified. The distant hum of traffic, the occasional creak of the house settling it all sounded louder, more ominous. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was watching me, lurking just out of sight. I didn't sleep well that night. The unease followed me through the hours, keeping me alert and restless. By morning, the air in the house felt a little lighter, but the sense of something being off didn't completely fade. I made sure to lock every door and window, convinced that I needed to be more careful. But even as I left for work, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the quiet of the house hid something darker just beneath the surface. Story 4. I was on the last train of the night, heading back from a late shift. The car was nearly empty, save for a few tired passengers and a man who had been sitting across from me since the last stop. I tried to ignore him at first, absorbed in the hum of the train and the city lights flashing by the window. But every time I glanced up, I caught his eyes on me. There was no mistaking it, he was staring, and his lips were curled into a grin that seemed a little too wide. At first, I told myself I was just being paranoid. It was late, and my mind was probably playing tricks on me. But each time I looked, his grin seemed to grow more unsettling, more knowing. I tried to focus on the book in my lap, pretending to read, but the sensation of being watched didn't go away. My skin prickled, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The more I tried to ignore him, the more my attention seemed to drift back to the man in the seat opposite me. I glanced up once more, and this time his grin was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a friendly smile or a casual expression, it was something more sinister. His eyes locked with mine, and the smile seemed to stretch even wider. I quickly looked away, staring out the window at the dark city passing by. But my heart began to race. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that this man wasn't just another late-night commuter. The train lurched slightly as it pulled into another stop, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. I shifted in my seat, pretending to rearrange my bag, but when I looked up again, the man was still there, staring at me, that same unsettling grin plastered across his face. I couldn't help it, I felt trapped. The train car was too small, and there was nowhere to go. My stop was still a few stations away, but the thought of staying on the train with him any longer made my skin crawl. I glanced at the other passengers, hoping for a distraction, but the car remained nearly empty. It was just me, the man, and the gentle hum of the train's movement. I could feel his gaze boring into me, and the longer I tried to ignore it, the more intense it became. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with an eerie silence that made every sound, every click of the train's wheels, every breath I took feel too loud. A few moments later, I couldn't stand it any longer. I shifted in my seat, moving closer to the door, hoping for a way out, but the man's grin followed me. His eyes never left me. It felt as though the entire world had narrowed down to just the two of us in that train car, and I was the prey. The air felt suffocating, and my heart pounded in my chest. My stop couldn't come soon enough. Finally, the train approached the station where I had to get off. I stood up quickly, my legs shaky as I grabbed my bag and rushed toward the door. I didn't dare to look back as I made my way to the exit, but I could feel the man's presence behind me. His grin was burned into my mind, and the thought of getting off the train and away from him was the only thing that kept me moving. The doors opened with a soft ding, and I stepped out onto the platform, breathing a sigh of relief. The cool night air felt like a welcome contrast to the stale, tense atmosphere of the train car. But as I stepped away from the train, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, startled, and saw the same man stepping off the train. His grin was still there, stretched wide, and his eyes locked onto mine once again. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. Why would he be getting off at my stop? I hadn't seen him get up or move during the ride, but here he was, following me onto the platform. The fear that had been building inside me surged to the surface, and I started walking faster, hoping to get to the station's exit before he could catch up to me. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps echoing in the quiet of the empty platform. I didn't dare look back again, but I could feel his presence drawing closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up once more, and I quickened my pace, practically jogging toward the station's exit. The lights above flickered as I hurried along, the sound of my footsteps loud in the otherwise still space. I reached the exit and pushed open the door, stepping into the cold night air. I glanced over my shoulder, hoping to see him stop at the station, but he was still there, right behind me. His grin was now a terrifying, toothy stretch across his face. I didn't know what to do. There was no one else around, no other commuters on the platform. It was just me, him, and the shadowy streets beyond. I took a sharp left, heading toward the bus stop, hoping the public transport would offer a way to lose him. As I walked faster, I glanced back once more. The man was still there, but now he was no longer smiling. His expression had shifted, but his eyes were still locked onto mine. It was as though he were daring me to run, daring me to do something, anything to escape. I picked up my pace, my legs moving faster than I thought they could go, and my breath came in short, panicked gasps. As I reached the bus stop, I could hear his footsteps behind me again, closer than ever. I turned around, fully prepared to confront him, to demand what he wanted, but when I looked, he was gone. There was no sign of him anywhere. The street was empty, and the sounds of the city felt deafening in comparison to the silence I had just experienced. The bus arrived moments later, and I got on without hesitation. I sat near the front, glancing out the window, half expecting to see the man standing on the sidewalk, watching me. But there was nothing. I felt a mix of relief and confusion wash over me, unsure of what had just happened. Who was that man? Why had he followed me? The ride home felt endless, but eventually I reached my apartment building. I got off the bus and made my way inside, locking the door behind me. I leaned against it for a moment, trying to steady my breath. The encounter on the train had left me rattled, and I couldn't shake the image of his grin from my mind. Whoever he was, wherever he had gone, I hoped I would never see him again. But as I turned to head for my room, I noticed something strange. There was a note on my door. I reached for it, hesitating for a moment, then unfolded it. Written in the same scrawl as before were the words, "Nice to see you again." Story 5. I had been babysitting for the Hendersons for a few months now, and it was one of those quiet nights when everything seemed perfectly normal. The kids were asleep upstairs, their soft breathing the only sound in the house. I sat on the couch, flicking through channels, trying to find something to keep me occupied until the parents came home. It was a peaceful night, or so I thought. The phone rang, slicing through the stillness of the house. I froze for a moment, unsure whether to answer. It was late, and I didn't recognize the number. After a few rings, I hesitated but picked up the receiver. "Hello?" I said, my voice calm, but a small knot of unease started to form in my stomach. The voice on the other end was low and cold. "I see you through the window." My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The curtains were drawn, The lights in the living room dimmed just enough to keep things cozy, and I hadn't heard anything that could explain the voice's statement. My first instinct was to dismiss it, to laugh it off as a prank call or something absurd. But the unsettling tone in his voice kept me on edge. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't respond immediately, but I could hear faint breathing, as though he were just waiting for me to speak. The silence stretched for several seconds, and I began to feel the weight of his presence, even though I couldn't see him. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with anticipation. "What do you want?" I asked, feeling my pulse race. Then his voice returned, smooth and unnervingly calm. "I can see you sitting there, all alone, just waiting for someone to come home." The way he spoke made it clear he wasn't guessing. He knew exactly what I was doing. I stood up from the couch, my hands trembling slightly as I walked toward the front window, glancing outside. The street was dark, the only light coming from the dim street lamp at the corner. Nothing seemed out of place, but the hairs on my arms prickled as if something invisible was watching me. I returned to the phone, my grip tightening around the receiver. "Stop messing around," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "The police will be called if you don't stop this." A brief silence followed, and then he spoke again. "You think they'll be able to help?" "I'm already here." My blood ran cold. My thoughts began to race. Was he outside? Was he in the yard? I couldn't see anyone through the windows. The house was on a quiet street, and it seemed unlikely that anyone would be lurking around. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. What if he was hiding just out of sight, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake? I walked slowly toward the back of the house, trying to keep my mind focused on something other than the growing anxiety that twisted in my stomach. My eyes scanned the dark backyard, but I didn't see anything unusual. No shadows moving in the corners. No strange figures lurking near the trees. Still, the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. My eyes kept flicking back to the window, convinced I might spot something, someone. I returned to the living room, where the phone still sat in my hand. The man's voice came through again, clear and direct. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The words sent a surge of adrenaline through my body. I could hear the faintest sound in the background now, like something scraping against wood or the sound of feet shuffling. My mind raced as I tried to process everything, and the most terrifying thought struck me. What if he was inside the house? I grabbed the phone tightly, my mind spinning. "I'm calling the cops now," I said, trying to sound firm, even though my hands were shaking. There was no way I was going to let some creep intimidate me. But the man didn't seem worried at all. He chuckled, the sound cold and hollow. "You can try, but by the time they get here, it'll be too late." The line went dead. I stood frozen for a few moments, staring at the phone in disbelief. My chest felt tight as panic crept in. What should I do? Should I lock all the doors and wait for the police? Or was he already inside? My heart pounded as I started to move toward the kitchen, but then I stopped. The thought hit me like a bolt of lightning. What if he wasn't outside? What if he was inside? My legs moved on their own, carrying me toward the staircase. I needed to check on the kids. I needed to make sure they were safe. I crept upstairs, my pulse echoing in my ears, the silence in the house now deafening. The kids were still asleep, their small bodies nestled under the covers, completely unaware of what was happening. I exhaled a shaky breath of relief, but something didn't feel right. I had been so focused on the phone call, so concerned with whether or not the man was outside, that I hadn't noticed the small detail. The door to the master bedroom, which was always closed, was now slightly ajar. I walked cautiously toward it, the hairs on my neck standing up as I peered inside. The room was empty, but the bed had been disturbed. A slight indentation in the covers suggested someone had been there recently. I felt a cold sweat on my brow. Someone had been in that room. My heart raced. I backed away from the door and turned toward the stairs, trying to keep my breathing even. It was time to get out of there. I needed to leave before it was too late. Just as I turned to head back down, I heard a faint creak. My blood ran cold. The stairs. Someone was on the stairs. I didn't need to look up to know that I wasn't alone anymore. Story 6. The evening air was cool, and the streets were quiet as I walked home from a friend's house. The kind of quiet that only happens late at night when most people are tucked in, and the world seems to be holding its breath. The streetlights cast long shadows, and I quickened my pace, eager to get home. As I turned onto my block, I noticed a man standing by the bus stop at the corner. He was looking down, but as soon as I approached, he lifted his head and smiled at me. It wasn't a friendly smile. There was something about it that unsettled me, something crooked and off-putting, like he knew something I didn't. I instinctively slowed my steps, my gut telling me to be cautious. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth but with a strange edge to it. "Can you help me with directions? I'm trying to find 5th Street." I glanced around, unsure of how to respond. The man's clothes weren't out of place, but the way he was standing too still, too purposeful made my skin crawl. I gave a small nod, trying to keep my tone polite, but I wasn't sure how to help him. "Sorry, I'm not sure. I'm not from around here," I said, stepping around him and continuing on my way. I thought that would be the end of it. The man would turn away, thank me, or move on to someone else. But as I took a few more steps, I heard the shuffle of footsteps behind me. I hesitated, then looked over my shoulder. The man was following me, still wearing that unnerving smile, his steps just a little too measured, as if he was deliberately matching my pace. My heart rate quickened, and I forced myself to keep walking, trying not to show that I was nervous. I had to remind myself that people were still out at this hour and I wasn't alone. But the more I walked, the more I could feel his presence growing behind me, like an invisible weight pressing down on me. I glanced around, but the street was deserted, just the occasional parked car and the dim glow of streetlights that seemed too far apart, casting long dark shadows. I tried to pick up the pace, but so did he. Every time I sped up, I heard his footsteps increase, never quickening, but never slowing either. It felt like he was deliberately keeping just enough distance between us, like a predator stalking its prey. The smile was still there, plastered on his face, and I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my neck. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I reached the corner and turned onto another street, hoping to lose him in the maze of alleyways and side roads. But when I looked over my shoulder again, he was still there, just a few steps behind me. My pulse was racing now, a cold sweat starting to form along the back of my neck. I didn't dare look back again, but I could hear him, the steady rhythm of his footsteps never faltering. For the next 3 blocks I moved faster, hoping he would either lose interest or get the message that I wasn't willing to engage. The streetlights here were fewer and farther apart, and the silence felt oppressive. There was a strange sense of isolation, as if the world had been muted. With every step I took, I could feel him still behind me, matching my pace. I told myself that I could outrun him if I needed to, but something told me he wasn't in a hurry. He was in control. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. Should I stop and confront him? Should I find a place to duck into, like a store or a cafe, to lose him in the crowd? But the neighborhood was still quiet, and I knew that stopping might be a mistake. I couldn't keep up this pace forever, and I wasn't sure how far I could go before my legs gave out. I had one more block to go. I was almost home, almost within reach of the familiar safety of my apartment. I started to turn onto my street, hoping that the familiarity of the area would make him leave. But just as I reached the corner, I heard him stop. I didn't turn around immediately, but I could feel his absence like a void in the air. I took another step, and then another, my mind still racing. Something was different, though the air seemed quieter, more still, and I felt a strange unease creeping over me. It was as though the entire world had just stopped moving. I glanced behind me quickly, but the man was gone. There was no sign of him, no trace of his footsteps, nothing. I stood there for a moment, frozen in place, before I forced myself to move forward, my legs trembling as I walked the last few steps to my door. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me and sliding the bolt into place. My heart was pounding, and the adrenaline from the walk had left me shaky. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. The memory of that man's smile still burned into my mind. There was no way he could have just vanished like that, could he? Maybe he had just turned around and gone another way. Maybe I was overreacting, letting my fear get the better of me. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been off about the whole encounter. The way he had followed me without a word, the way his smile never wavered, it wasn't normal. Something told me that the man had not been just another lost soul asking for directions. There had been an intention in his actions, something I couldn't place, but it felt wrong. I couldn't help but wonder if I'd ever see him again, if that smile would haunt me the way it already had. Story 7. I woke up in the middle of the night, uneasy, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. The quiet hum of the house, usually comforting, now felt too still. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I groggily reached for it, half expecting a message from a friend or an email. But instead, it was a notification from my security camera system. The message read, "Motion detected at your front door." I rubbed my eyes, not sure if I had imagined it. It wasn't uncommon for the camera to catch passing cars or animals, but this felt different. I unlocked the video feed, half expecting to see nothing more than a cat or a random passerby. Instead, my screen lit up with the image of a man standing on my porch, perfectly still, facing my front door. He was wearing a dark hoodie, his hands shoved into his pockets, his head lowered as if he were waiting for something or someone. I squinted at the screen, confused. It was 3 a.m., way too late for anyone to be standing outside like that, especially without knocking or making any noise. I could see the dim light of the porch lamp casting shadows on the ground, highlighting his stillness. He didn't seem to be looking around or moving. He was just standing there, unmoving. My heart rate quickened as I watched the video, feeling a strange sense of dread creeping in. I wanted to call the police, but something in me hesitated. What would I even say? There was no sign of an immediate threat, no signs of a break-in or damage, just a man standing there in the dark staring at my door. I played the footage again, this time paying closer attention to the timestamps. The man had arrived at exactly 3 a.m. and hadn't moved since. For a full hour he stood there, perfectly still. Not once did he knock, ring the bell, or even walk around the porch. He simply stared at the door, his presence unnerving in its silence. By the time the hour mark passed, my anxiety was through the roof. I felt trapped in my own home, unable to understand why this person was out there, so close to my space, and yet so distant. I kept checking the footage, waiting for something to happen, waiting for him to leave, to move, to give me some explanation. But he didn't. He just stood there, unmoving, as if frozen in time. I decided to take a closer look at the footage, zooming in on the man's face. I could barely make out any features in the low light, but his posture was unnerving. His shoulders were slumped, and his head hung low, almost as if he were bowing to the door. But why? Was he waiting for someone to open it? Was he hoping for some sign of life from inside? Or was he waiting for the clock to strike something else? I couldn't tell. As the minutes passed, I found myself second-guessing everything. What if he was waiting for me to leave? What if he knew something about me that I didn't? My thoughts spiraled as I watched him continue to stand there. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, as if he were waiting for some kind of response from me, waiting for me to come to the door, to interact with him, to acknowledge his presence. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. The fear was overwhelming, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. At 4 a.m., the man finally moved slightly. He didn't walk away, didn't leave, but instead turned his head, looking over his shoulder as though he had heard something or noticed something in the distance. He didn't make any attempt to walk toward it, though. Instead, he stood there, staring off into the night. I couldn't tell what he was looking at, but the moment was enough to send a cold chill down my spine. I couldn't take it anymore. My mind raced with questions. Who was he? What did he want? Why didn't he knock? I grabbed my phone, trying to figure out if I should call the police, but what was I supposed to say? Someone standing on my porch. It didn't seem like enough of a reason to involve law enforcement, but my gut told me it was something more than that. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being targeted, that this person wasn't just an innocent passerby. I went to my front window and peeked out through the blinds. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the porch, but to my relief, the man was gone. The porch was empty, just as it should have been. I felt a fleeting sense of relief, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. Where had he gone? How had he left without me noticing? The entire situation felt off, as if something sinister had been hanging in the air, and now it was gone, but it hadn't disappeared completely. I sat down on my couch, trying to steady my breath. My mind kept replaying the footage over and over again. It didn't make sense. Why had he just stood there for so long without doing anything? Was he waiting for me to do something? Was this some kind of strange message or warning? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a prank, or maybe he had been looking for something on the porch. But my gut told me there was more to it. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept my security cameras active, monitoring the footage obsessively, but nothing unusual happened. The man never returned. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about his silent vigil at my door, the way he had just stood there without a word. I had no answers, only questions that kept echoing in my mind. Who was he? And why had he come to my doorstep that night? Story 8. The hike had been peaceful at first. I enjoyed the quiet of the forest, the rustle of leaves underfoot, and the occasional chirp of birds hidden in the trees. I had ventured far beyond the usual paths, determined to find a secluded spot where I could sit and reflect, away from the noise of everyday life. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to quiet down, and it was in that silence that I found an unsettling discovery. I came across the campsite almost by accident. It wasn't a proper campsite, not one with a fire pit or organized gear, but instead, a small clearing where someone had hastily set up a tent. The tent was flapping gently in the breeze, slightly askew as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. There was no sign of anyone nearby, no sound other than the soft wind whispering through the trees. It felt strange to find it here, so far off the beaten path. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached the campsite cautiously. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't strong, but there was an odor of food, the kind that had been left out too long, now slightly rancid. On a small, makeshift wooden table, there was a bowl with what looked like the remnants of a meal, half-eaten bread, a few pieces of what could have been meat, and a scattering of crumbs. The sight made my stomach churn, not because of the meal itself, but because it seemed out of place. Why would someone leave food like this, unfinished and abandoned? I scanned the area, looking for any sign of the person who had been here. There were no footprints leading away from the campsite, no broken branches or disturbed leaves to indicate that someone had left recently. It was as though the person had simply vanished. My mind raced with questions. Had something happened to them? Or had they just left in a hurry? For reasons I couldn't understand. The thought that someone could be nearby, hidden just out of sight, sent a chill down my spine. I stepped closer to the table, eyeing the meal. There were no utensils, no cups, and the bowl looked like it had been hastily set down, as if the person had planned to return but never did. I reached down, my fingers brushing against the cool ceramic, and noticed something odd. Beneath the table, partially hidden by a pile of dried leaves, was a small, crumpled note. The paper was weathered, edges curling, as if it had been there for days, maybe longer. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. The note was short, hastily scrawled in a messy, almost frantic handwriting. "Don't trust the trees." The words felt out of place, nonsensical even, but they sent a shiver through me. Who would leave such a note in the middle of nowhere, in the woods, on a lonely campsite? It didn't make sense. I looked around again, trying to see if there was any clue as to who might have written it or why. But there was nothing. No footprints, no other signs of life. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the campsite, feeling a growing sense of unease. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves and making the tent flap loudly. The trees around me creaked and groaned, casting long, twisted shadows across the clearing. The forest seemed alive in a way that felt unnatural, as if something were watching me. I swallowed hard, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. But when I looked around, there was nothing, no sign of movement, no figure lurking in the trees. Against my better judgment, I decided to continue exploring the area, though a knot of anxiety had settled in my stomach. I moved further into the woods, my eyes scanning the surroundings for anything unusual. I was on high alert now, feeling as though I was being observed, though I couldn't say by whom or what. The deeper I went, the more it seemed like the forest was closing in on me, the trees thickening, the underbrush growing denser. I had a sense of being drawn towards something, though I couldn't explain why. After what felt like hours, I finally stopped to rest. I was tired, my legs aching from the long hike, and I wanted nothing more than to sit down and gather my thoughts. I found a fallen log and perched on it, still unable to shake the strange feeling of being watched. The forest was eerily quiet now, the sounds of the birds and wind absent. All I could hear was my own breathing, the steady rhythm of my pulse, and the soft creaking of the trees. Something felt off, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I glanced around, my eyes falling on a particularly large tree just a few yards away. It was an old oak, its bark gnarled and twisted, its branches stretching out like skeletal arms reaching toward the sky. As I stared at it, I swore I saw movement within the shadows of the tree, as though something had shifted in the darkness. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was still. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly stood up, my legs shaky. I turned to head back to the campsite, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, keeping just out of my sight. I hurried back, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. I was almost at the campsite when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush behind me. I froze, my blood running cold. I wasn't alone. Someone or something was back there. I spun around, expecting to see someone following me, but the woods were empty. The air felt thick, heavy, and the silence was oppressive. I could barely hear my own thoughts over the pounding of my heart in my ears. In a panic, I started to run back toward the trail, desperate to leave the woods and the strange campsite behind. My footsteps were muffled by the soft earth beneath my boots, but I could still hear that distant sound of footsteps following, growing closer. I didn't dare look behind me again. I just ran, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps, the trees closing in around me like a living, breathing entity. I didn't stop until I was back at the trailhead, my legs trembling, my chest heaving. I looked around, but the woods were silent again, peaceful as if nothing had happened. I could still feel the lingering sense of dread, but there was no sign of anyone, nothing to explain what I had just experienced. All I had was the strange campsite, the unfinished meal, and the chilling note. And in my mind, I couldn't shake the thought that whatever had been out there in the woods, watching me, was still lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Story 9. I had just finished my shift at work and was looking forward to heading home. The parking garage was empty, the usual dull hum of fluorescent lights overhead filling the quiet space. The only sound was the soft echo of my footsteps as I walked toward my car. It wasn't particularly late, but the garage had a way of feeling eerily deserted, the silence amplifying the sense of isolation. I reached my car, and as I unlocked it, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. They were light, almost soft, like someone walking on the same floor, just a few paces away. I froze for a moment, the sound seemingly coming from right behind me, too close for comfort. I quickly turned around, expecting to see someone standing there, perhaps a fellow employee or another late-night driver, but there was no one in sight. The footsteps stopped the instant I turned. I stood there, staring into the dimly lit expanse of the garage, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The silence seemed to press in on me, almost suffocating. I glanced up and down the rows of parked cars, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. The garage felt more like a tomb than a place to park vehicles. I took a cautious step forward, peering into the shadows, but there was no one there. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that I had simply imagined it. It was late, after all, and I was probably just tired from a long day of work. Maybe the sound had come from the shifting of my own footsteps or the creaking of the building settling. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettling the experience became. It was too precise, too timed to have been a mere coincidence. Someone had been behind me. Someone had been walking, just out of sight. I looked down the aisle to my right, then to the left. The garage stretched on in both directions, its empty spaces and concrete pillars casting long shadows in the dim light. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stepped into my car, locking the door quickly, though I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder through the rearview mirror. I half expected to see someone standing behind me, but there was nothing. Just the empty garage stretching out in every direction. The air seemed to grow colder and a shiver ran down my spine. I didn't want to look again, but my eyes kept darting back to the mirror, scanning the shadows. Every passing moment felt like an eternity. I fumbled with the keys in my hand, starting the engine and preparing to drive out. As I shifted the car into reverse, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I reversed slowly, cautiously, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. The footsteps still echoed in my mind, though I couldn't hear anything now. The garage seemed eerily still, the silence only broken by the hum of my car's engine and the occasional squeak of the tires on the concrete floor. I made a sharp turn to head for the exit, but the feeling of unease didn't leave me. I was too aware of the empty space around me, too aware of the shadows in every corner. As I neared the exit, I glanced at the mirror once more. Only this time I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A figure, just a glimpse, appeared behind me. It was a shadow, fleeting and indistinct, like a person just out of reach of the light. I slammed on the brakes, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The figure was gone in an instant, leaving only the emptiness of the parking garage in its place. I waited, my breath catching in my chest, my hands trembling. Nothing happened. No footsteps, no movement. It was as if the figure had never been there at all. I looked around, unsure of what to do next. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Had I imagined it? Or had I truly seen something, someone that wasn't supposed to be there? The cold sweat that had begun to form on my skin only added to my discomfort. I checked the mirror again, more out of habit than expectation, and this time I didn't see anything. The garage seemed to have returned to its state of lifeless quiet. I couldn't bring myself to drive away, though. My foot hovered over the gas pedal, unsure of whether I should leave or stay. Something about the situation felt wrong, like I was about to leave behind something I couldn't quite understand. After what felt like an eternity, I finally pushed the gas pedal down and drove forward, exiting the garage and into the night. My car's headlights cut through the darkness as I turned onto the main road, the familiar streetlights helping to steady my nerves. But no matter how far I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been alone in that garage. I kept replaying the sound of the footsteps in my mind and the way they had stopped as soon as I turned around. It didn't make sense. The rest of the drive home was a blur. My mind kept returning to that parking garage, to the strange feeling of being followed by something or someone just out of sight. I couldn't help but wonder if I had imagined it all, if my tired mind had played tricks on me. But deep down I knew something had happened, something I couldn't explain. When I finally reached my apartment and parked, I quickly locked the doors behind me. The night seemed quieter now, but the unease still lingered. I didn't sleep well, my mind constantly drifting back to the garage, to the footsteps that had stopped when I turned around. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just overthinking it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me that night. Something I couldn't see. Story 10. It was a typical evening when I stepped into the elevator of my apartment building after a long day at work. I pressed the button for my floor and leaned against the back wall, watching the numbers light up as the elevator ascended. Just as the doors were about to close, a man entered and pressed the button for the same floor. I didn't pay him much attention at first. He was a bit scruffy, wearing a hoodie and jeans, looking like he had just come from a long day, much like me. The elevator creaked slightly as it moved, and the soft hum of its machinery filled the space. I glanced at the man once, noting that he wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, the faintest shadow of a frown on his face. There was nothing inherently strange about him, but something about his presence made me feel uneasy. The air in the elevator suddenly seemed thick, heavy, and I found myself wondering why I had never seen him before, even though I knew most of the tenants in the building. The elevator came to a slow halt at my floor. The doors slid open with a soft chime, and I stepped out, relieved to be back in the comfort of my building. But as I turned to walk down the hallway to my apartment, I froze. The man from the elevator was standing at the end of the hallway, watching me. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there with his hands still in his pockets, staring directly at me with an unsettling calmness. My heart skipped a beat, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I felt an overwhelming sense of discomfort wash over me, and I instinctively took a step back. The hallway, usually well lit, now felt suffocating, as though the walls were closing in on me. I told myself I was being paranoid. It had to be a coincidence, right? Maybe he just happened to be heading in the same direction. But the longer I stood there, the more wrong it felt. I forced myself to move forward, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that clung to me. My keys were in my hand, and I could feel the cold metal pressing into my palm as I approached my door. I didn't dare look back at the man, but I could feel his presence, his eyes following me down the hallway. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my fingers fumbled slightly as I inserted the key into the lock. Just as the door clicked open, I heard the soft sound of footsteps behind me. My pulse quickened, and I rushed inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I stood there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, my mind racing. What was I thinking? Maybe I was just being paranoid, but something about the way he was standing there, so still and silent, didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart still pounding. I tried to tell myself that I was overreacting, that he was probably just another resident who happened to be waiting for the elevator. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the way he was standing, his stillness, the cold expression on his face, the way his eyes never left me. I walked over to the window, peering out cautiously, half expecting to see him standing out there, watching my apartment. But the hallway was empty. Relieved, I turned away from the window, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I couldn't get the image of him standing at the end of the hallway out of my mind. Why had he been waiting there? Why hadn't he moved when the elevator doors opened? The more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. That night, I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. I went about my evening, but my thoughts kept returning to the strange encounter. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but every time I walked through the apartment, I felt as though someone was right behind me, just out of sight. I'd check the locks on my doors again, just to be sure, and glance out the window every few minutes, hoping I was just being paranoid. But the thoughts wouldn't leave me. Around midnight, I decided I couldn't stand it any longer. I had to know if he was still out there, if something had been wrong. I stood at the window again, peering into the darkness of the hallway, and that's when I saw it. The man was standing there again, exactly where he had been earlier, motionless, his eyes fixed on my apartment. His face was harder to make out in the dim lighting, but I could still feel the weight of his gaze. I felt my stomach churn. How had he gotten up here without me hearing him? And why was he standing there again, just staring at my door? I backed away from the window, my heart racing. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I call someone? The police? What would I even say? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the man standing in the hallway haunted me, and I could feel the coldness of his stare. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I had imagined it. But as I left my apartment to go to work, I noticed something chilling. The same man was standing at the elevator when I walked into the lobby. He wasn't looking at me, but his posture was the same. He was standing still, like he had been in the hallway. The moment our eyes met, he gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, and for a split second, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. It was the same feeling of dread, like I was being hunted, and it made my skin crawl. I quickly turned my gaze away, pretending not to notice him, and hurried out of the building. But even as I walked down the street to my car, I could feel his presence lingering, like a shadow following me wherever I went. Story 11. I had just finished dinner and was lounging on the couch when I decided to call my friend Sarah. We hadn't caught up in a while, and with both of us working from home, it was easy to find time to chat. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the hum of my laptop as I set up for the video call. My place was empty, and I relished the peaceful solitude. It was just me and Sarah, or so I thought. When the call connected, I greeted her with a smile, and she returned it, her face lighting up on the screen. We talked about our days, the usual banter about work, and a new series we'd both started watching. Everything felt normal, just another evening spent catching up with a friend. But then, in the middle of our conversation, Sarah's expression shifted. Her smile slowly faded, replaced by a look of growing concern. "Who's behind you?" she asked, her voice sharp with fear. I froze. For a moment I thought I had misheard her, but the panic in her voice was unmistakable. I turned around quickly, my eyes scanning the living room behind me. It was just the usual setup: my couch, the coffee table, the bookshelf. Nothing out of place. I glanced back at Sarah, who was staring at me wide-eyed through the screen, her face pale. I felt my heart rate pick up, my skin prickling with unease. "What do you mean?" "There's no one here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The apartment was eerily quiet, not a sound to be heard. The only light was from my desk lamp, casting a warm glow around the room, but the corners remained in shadow. Sarah's gaze didn't leave me. She looked terrified, her eyes flicking behind me, then back to the screen. "I swear I saw someone standing there," she insisted, her voice trembling. "It was right behind you, just standing still. You didn't hear anything?" I turned around again, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I wasn't alone. The room still appeared empty, and the only sound was the faint hum of the laptop. "I'm alone," I said again, more firmly this time, though I wasn't sure I believed myself. The silence felt oppressive, as if the very air around me was thickening with something I couldn't see. Sarah's face was now a mixture of confusion and dread. She opened her mouth to say something, but then her eyes widened even more. She looked at me with panic, her hand flying to her mouth. "There's someone behind you," she whispered, almost breathless. "I can see their face." I spun around once again, my stomach twisting in fear, but there was nothing. No one standing there. I walked across the room, checking every corner, every shadow, but the apartment was still just as it had been when I sat down. I returned to the laptop, my hands shaking slightly as I sat back down. Sarah's face remained on the screen, but her expression was now a mix of disbelief and fear. "Are you messing with me?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Sarah shook her head vigorously. "I swear I saw something. I know I did. It was right behind you, looking at you." I stared at the screen, trying to process what she was saying. The idea of someone being in my apartment, standing behind me, made my skin crawl. But how could it be? I was alone. The door was locked, the windows shut. I had been in here all evening, and no one had entered. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, I suggested, though I didn't believe it. Sarah was too scared, too certain of what she had seen. I glanced behind me once more, but the living room was still empty. I swallowed hard, the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. "I don't know what it was, but I'm telling you something's not right," Sarah said, her voice low and hesitant now. "You need to check again. Maybe you missed something." Her words made my pulse spike. I slowly got up from the couch and walked over to the hallway. I checked the front door locked. I checked the windows shut tight. The bathroom door was ajar, and when I peeked inside, there was no one there either. The apartment felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. "Sarah, I don't know what's going on," I said, my voice shaking. "There's no one here." But as soon as I returned to the living room and sat down, I noticed something odd. The bookshelf, which had been untouched just moments before, was now slightly askew. One of the books on the lower shelf was pulled out, not all the way, but just enough to catch my eye. I stood up again, my stomach churning as I walked over to the shelf. I moved the book back into place and checked the others. Nothing else seemed out of place, but the sense of dread hadn't lifted. "I don't know how to explain this," I said to Sarah, trying to sound composed. But even as I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the room. Something unseen, something just beyond my reach. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. But then, as I sat back down, the doorbell rang. I froze. No one was supposed to be here. I hadn't been expecting anyone. My phone was silent, no missed messages, no calls. I stared at the door, unsure of what to do. The bell rang again, louder this time. "I've got to go," I said to Sarah, my voice tight. She nodded, looking just as unsettled. I ended the call and slowly walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, and when I reached for the doorknob, I hesitated. The air was thick with an unsettling tension, and I couldn't shake the thought that the person Sarah had seen was still here, somewhere. Slowly, I opened the door. There was no one there, just the quiet, empty hallway outside. Story 12. It was an ordinary afternoon when I received the voicemail. I had just finished my lunch and was scrolling through my phone when the notification popped up an unheard voicemail, but the odd thing was the caller ID. It was from my own number. My curiosity spiked, but I shrugged it off, assuming it was some sort of glitch. Maybe I had accidentally dialed myself, or perhaps it was a mistake. It wasn't until I played the voicemail that my heart sank. The message was silent at first, the usual background noise of a call fading into nothingness. But then, slowly, I began to hear something. Breathing. It was deep and ragged, as if someone was standing right there, close enough to the phone to be heard clearly, but not speaking. I didn't recognize the sound. It wasn't mine. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Someone had been using my phone, or worse, had been watching me. But who? I rewound the message, listening to the breathing again. It wasn't random or casual, as if it were a normal call. It was deliberate, almost as if whoever was on the other end was waiting for me to react. I checked the time the voicemail was sent. There was nothing special about it. No indication that anyone else had been near me at that moment. I had been at home, alone, with no one around to make that call. The air around me suddenly felt heavier, and I could feel my pulse quicken. My first instinct was to check my phone for any signs of tampering. I looked through my recent calls, my messages, anything out of the ordinary. But everything appeared normal. There were no strange contacts, no missed calls, no evidence of anyone having used my phone. Still, the thought of someone listening to me, breathing into the phone while I was oblivious, was enough to send a chill down my spine. I stared at the screen, unsure of what to do. Should I call the police? Should I tell someone? But what would I say? There was no proof that anything had happened, no indication of a break-in, no signs of any danger. The only thing I had was that voicemail, which when played again only had the sound of breathing. It felt pointless to even try to explain it to anyone. I played the message again, hoping to hear something new. Maybe there was a clue, something I missed the first time. The breathing was still there, steady and unnerving, but that was all. I sat in silence after it ended, staring at my phone. What was I supposed to do now? My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just a prank, a weird glitch, or some telemarketer trying to mess with me, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The next few hours felt like an eternity. I tried to go about my day, distracted by the creeping sense of unease that had settled in my chest. Every time I looked at my phone, I wondered if the person who had left that voicemail would call again. Every creak in the house, every sound from outside seemed amplified. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, listening to me, waiting. The evening came, and I found myself checking the locks on all the doors and windows more than once. The house felt strangely empty, despite my efforts to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. But then, as I sat on the couch, my phone rang. My own number flashed on the screen. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure whether to answer. What if it was the same person from the voicemail? What if it was them again, breathing into the phone, waiting for me to pick up? But my curiosity got the best of me, and I swiped the screen to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. I waited for a response, but there was nothing. The call continued, the same eerie quiet on the other end. I felt my heart thumping in my chest, my palms growing slick with sweat. I tried again, louder this time. "Hello? Who is this?" Still nothing. I glanced at the call timer. Several minutes passed without a single word. Then, suddenly, the line went dead. The call ended, leaving me in the same oppressive silence. I stared at the screen, unsure of what just happened. Was I imagining it? Was someone playing a cruel joke on me? I sat there, frozen, the phone still in my hand. The moment I'd hung up, a new message notification popped up. I checked it, my breath catching in my throat once more. It was another voicemail from my own number. Hesitant, I played it, but I already knew what it would be. The same breathing. Only this time it was heavier, more labored, like the person on the other end was struggling to control their breath. It was closer, almost as if they were standing right behind me. My body tensed, and I spun around, expecting to see someone in the room with me. But I was alone. I checked the windows, the doors, even the closet. Everything was locked. Everything was as it should be. I couldn't explain it. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't rationalize the feeling that something was wrong, that I wasn't truly alone in my own home. My phone rang again, and this time I couldn't bring myself to answer. The screen displayed my own number once more, and I watched as it rang out. The eerie breathing still echoed in my ears, and I didn't know how much longer I could endure it. Days passed, and I kept the phone by my side, every ring sending a jolt of fear through me. The messages continued silent, unsettling, always from my own number, and each time the breathing grew closer. I couldn't escape it, and I couldn't explain it. Story 13. I always enjoyed the early morning runs. The air was crisp, and the streets were still quiet, with only the sound of my feet hitting the pavement. It was the perfect time to clear my mind before the day began. On one particular morning, as I ran through the park, I noticed a man sitting on a bench near the path. He was dressed in an old, faded jacket and dark pants, looking out toward the horizon, not at all bothered by the cold morning air. I didn't think much of it as I jogged past, but there was something unsettling about him. His posture was still, almost unnaturally so, and he seemed completely unaware of the world around him. His eyes, though, followed me as I passed, a gaze that lingered just a little too long for my comfort. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the odd feeling in my stomach. It was probably nothing, just a person out early, enjoying the peace like I was. The next morning, I followed my usual route again. As I neared the same spot, I saw him once more. The man was sitting on the same bench, in the same position, wearing the same clothes. It was as if he hadn't moved an inch since the day before. His eyes locked onto me again, and for a moment, I felt a chill creep down my spine. The park was quiet, with no one else in sight, but his gaze felt so intense, so predatory, that I couldn't bring myself to look away. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, that maybe he was just an early riser like me, but something about the situation didn't sit right. Who sat in the same spot, wearing the same clothes day after day, without moving? I picked up my pace again, my mind racing as I ran. The man's figure faded behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me the entire time. It wasn't just a glance anymore, it was as if he was studying me, waiting for something. The next few days were no different. Every morning I would see him sitting on the same bench. His clothes were always the same, worn, faded, and unremarkable. I couldn't understand why he was always there. Was he homeless? Did he have nowhere else to go? Each time I passed, his eyes would follow me with that same unsettling intensity, like he was expecting something, waiting for me to make the next move. I started to change my route to avoid the park. There was something about the man that unnerved me, and I wasn't sure why. I couldn't shake the feeling. But every morning, no matter which way I turned, the thought of that bench and him sitting there lingered in my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the way his eyes followed me, as though he knew something I didn't, as if I was the one being watched, not the other way around. A week later, I decided to confront it. I couldn't keep running from it, and I needed to know if it was all in my head. I woke up early and jogged toward the park once again. As I neared the bench, I saw him, but this time he wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on the ground in front of him, his hands resting on his knees, motionless. I slowed my pace as I approached, curiosity getting the better of me. "Are you all right?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. He didn't respond immediately. For a long moment there was only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I stood there, waiting for him to acknowledge me, but he remained completely still. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine. There was no recognition, no emotion, just that same cold, vacant stare. He blinked slowly, and for a second, I thought he might speak. But instead, he just smiled, a slow, unnerving grin that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I'm just waiting," he said, his voice hoarse and dry, as though he hadn't spoken in years. "Waiting for what?" I asked, feeling more uneasy with every passing second. "For you," he replied. His words were so simple, yet they sent a chill through me. I wanted to run, to turn around and never look back, but I couldn't. Something held me in place. Before I could respond, he turned his gaze away, staring back at the horizon. His body became motionless again, like a statue. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. I didn't want to be near him any longer, but I couldn't bring myself to leave either. I felt trapped, as if I were in the middle of something I couldn't understand. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move, slowly backing away until I turned and started running again. The following morning, I decided I wouldn't go to the park. I couldn't face him again, not after that strange encounter. But as I ran down a different street, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. And there he was. The man was sitting on the same bench, in the same spot, wearing the same clothes. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, but I could feel his eyes on me, even from a distance. I didn't slow down, didn't stop to look back. I just kept running, my heart pounding in my chest. Every day after that, I continued to see him, always in the same place. It didn't matter what time I ran, what day of the week it was, he was always there, watching. His presence weighed on me, like an invisible force that I couldn't escape. The bench had become his throne, the park his domain, and I was nothing more than a spectator in his twisted game. Eventually, I stopped running altogether. The thought of encountering him again was too much for me, but every time I passed the park, I couldn't help but glance over. And there he was, still sitting on the same bench, waiting for me. Story 14. I had been traveling for work and decided to stay at an Airbnb for a few nights. The place was cozy, nestled in a quiet neighborhood, and seemed perfect for a short stay. The host was polite, and everything appeared to be just as advertised, with warm, inviting decor and modern amenities. After a long day of meetings, I was looking forward to a quiet evening in the apartment, but something about the space felt just a little off. The first few hours went by without incident. I unpacked my bags, made myself a cup of tea, and sat on the couch, enjoying the peace and quiet. The apartment was on the top floor of a building, and from the windows I could see the city stretching out below. Everything seemed perfect until I noticed a small, shiny object near the ceiling just above the air vent in the living room. At first, I thought it was nothing more than a dust particle or a light reflection, but something about it caught my attention, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The object wasn't big, just the size of a small lens, but it glimmered in the light, and the more I looked at it, the more out of place it seemed. I got up from the couch and walked over to the air vent, squinting at the ceiling. There, tucked inside the vent, was a tiny camera lens, barely visible unless you were looking for it. My heart skipped a beat as I stood there, staring at the lens. It was angled in such a way that it seemed like it could be pointed directly at the couch. My stomach churned with the sickening realization I was being watched. The thought sent a chill down my spine. How long had it been there? Was it hidden somewhere else in the apartment too? I quickly backed away from the vent, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence, or perhaps it was some kind of security feature installed by the host. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I had read stories before stories about people who found hidden cameras in vacation rentals, and now it seemed like I had become one of those stories. I felt trapped, unsure of what to do next. I took a few steps back, trying to think clearly. The first thing that crossed my mind was to confront the host. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message asking if there were any security cameras in the apartment. But then I hesitated. What if the host was in on it? What if they were watching me right now, reading my message as I typed it? The feeling of unease intensified, and I couldn't help but look around the room, as if the walls were closing in on me. The silence in the apartment seemed to grow louder. I decided to check the rest of the space, moving through the rooms one by one, looking for any other signs of surveillance. In the bathroom, I inspected the mirror, checking for any unusual wiring or hidden devices. I felt ridiculous, but the growing sense of paranoia made me second-guess everything. I couldn't afford to ignore this feeling, not now. I even went so far as to unscrew the vent cover, carefully removing it to get a better look at the camera. It was small, almost imperceptible, but there it was staring back at me with its cold, mechanical eye. It was hard to believe this was happening to me. I had rented this place in good faith, assuming I would have a quiet, safe stay. Now I felt exposed, like I was in a scene from one of those horror films where the protagonist is unaware they're being watched. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from the host. I hope everything is to your liking. Let me know if you need anything. My hands shook as I read the message, and I struggled to come up with a response. What could I say? Should I report this? Should I call the police? My mind raced with the possibilities, but each thought was clouded by the fear that the host might already be aware of what I had discovered. I decided to do what felt safest: leave. I grabbed my things, stuffed them into my bag, and rushed out of the apartment. I wasn't going to stay there for another minute, not with the knowledge that someone might have been watching me. I stepped into the hallway, the air feeling thicker with every step. As I descended the stairs, I checked my phone once more, trying to steady my nerves. There was no way I was going back to that apartment. I needed to find somewhere else to stay, and I couldn't risk returning to that Airbnb, even if it was just to confront the host. I reached out to another friend for a recommendation, and within minutes I had secured a new place for the night. I felt relief wash over me as I arrived at the new location away from the prying eyes of that hidden camera. But as I settled into the new space, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't done enough. The camera had been there for who knows how long, and I had no idea who had been watching. I couldn't help but wonder if there were other victims, other unsuspecting travelers who had stayed there before me. I felt a mix of guilt and anger that I hadn't discovered it sooner. But there was one thing I knew for certain: I would never again stay at an Airbnb without carefully checking every inch of the place, especially the things I had once taken for granted, like air vents. That night I slept uneasily. The thought of the camera, its tiny, impersonal lens, lingered in my mind. What was the host's intention? Was it just for security, or was there something more sinister at play? And more importantly, how many others had unknowingly stayed there, oblivious to the fact that they were being watched? The answers to those questions would haunt me for a long time. Story 15. The parking lot was quiet as I made my way to my car. It was just past midnight, and the few cars left were either parked near the entrance or tucked away in the far corner of the lot. As I walked toward my car, I noticed something strange. There was a van parked several spaces away, but it didn't have any license plates. At first I thought maybe it was an abandoned vehicle, but something about it made me uneasy. I couldn't quite explain it, but the absence of plates set off an odd feeling in my chest. I didn't dwell on it for long, though. My focus shifted to the familiar comfort of my car, the cool air inside, and the promise of getting home. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The quiet hum of the car, a small comfort in the still night. As I adjusted my mirrors, I glanced back at the van out of habit, and that's when I saw it, the van's side door slowly sliding open. My stomach lurched. I froze for a moment, my hand still gripping the steering wheel. My first instinct was to brush it off, to tell myself it was just some coincidence, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The van was parked too far from the other cars to be there by accident. It was almost as if it was positioned deliberately, hidden just out of the way of any security cameras. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe someone had just left the door open, or it was a fluke. But as I sat there, watching the door move ever so slightly, my gut told me that this wasn't random. There was no one in sight, no one around to explain the motion, and that made everything feel all the more suspicious. I started the car, still watching the van, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. I had to get out of there, but the van's door continued to slide open, as if it were waiting for something or someone. My heart was pounding now, my breath shallow. I glanced in my rearview mirror, then back at the door of the van, which was now wide enough for someone to slip out. Every instinct in me screamed to just drive away, but my eyes remained locked on the van, my mind racing through possibilities. I wasn't sure if I had imagined the movement or if I had seen someone on the other side of the van door. Was it just the shadows playing tricks on me? I looked away for a split second, taking a breath, trying to shake the feeling. But when I looked back, the door was fully open now. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a chill run through me. I couldn't just leave, not now. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid, but the whole situation felt wrong. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking, my mind in a blur. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, call the police, drive off and forget about it. But as I fumbled with the phone, trying to dial, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. My breath hitched. I turned my head just enough to see a figure standing near the open side of the van. I couldn't make out the person clearly, but the outline was unmistakable. Someone was definitely there, watching me. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel the presence of someone waiting, watching, as if they were expecting me to make a move. My pulse quickened. The figure stood completely still, almost unnervingly so, as if they were waiting for me to do something, anything. My heart hammered in my chest, and I knew that I had to leave. The van was too close. Whoever was standing there was too close. I shifted my car into reverse, trying to keep my eyes on the figure in the mirror. I couldn't see any more details, but the person seemed to be motionless, just standing by the open van, as if daring me to make a move. The air in the car felt heavy, suffocating. I felt like I was trapped in a bad dream, unable to escape. But I couldn't just sit here forever, staring into the mirror, waiting for something to happen. I reversed slowly, careful not to make a sound, my hands slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel. The figure in the van's open doorway remained perfectly still. I was almost out of the parking space when I heard a faint scraping noise like metal on metal coming from behind. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. I glanced at the side mirror, and that's when I saw it. A person had moved from the shadows and was now walking slowly toward my car. Panic surged through me. I slammed the car into drive, my foot heavy on the pedal. I tore out of the parking space, my tires screeching against the pavement as I sped toward the exit. The figure was still behind me, walking at a steady pace, never running, never hurrying. I dared a quick glance over my shoulder, but the figure was still there, barely visible in the dim light. I pushed the gas pedal further, the engine roaring as I rushed toward the street. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. My hands were trembling as I gripped the wheel, my mind spinning with questions. Why was the van parked there? Who was in it? What had that figure been waiting for? I didn't stop at any red lights, not until I was miles away, safely on a well-lit road. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I glanced in my rearview mirror, I half expected to see the van, its headlights reflecting in the darkness. I made it home that night, shaken, but I couldn't bring myself to forget what had happened. The feeling of being watched, of knowing someone had been right there, so close, stayed with me long after I parked my car and locked the door behind me. I didn't tell anyone at first. I wasn't sure what to make of it. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the van, about the figure, and about what would have happened if I had stayed there just a few moments longer. Story 16. I had just settled into bed after a long day, the sheets cool against my skin as I adjusted my pillow. The room was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the ceiling fan spinning above me. I pulled the blankets up to my chin, trying to shake off the lingering stress of work, hoping that sleep would come soon. Just as I started to close my eyes, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen, groggy from the lack of sleep. The message came from an unknown number. The text was short, just 3 words. "Why are you still awake?" My stomach dropped at the oddness of it. I didn't recognize the number, and I couldn't recall anyone I knew ever texting me with that kind of question, especially at this hour. I stared at the phone, feeling a strange chill creep over me. I told myself it was just a wrong number, but a part of me couldn't shake the unease that lingered. I quickly typed a reply, trying to brush off the discomfort. "Who is this?" I pressed send and placed the phone back down, half expecting to get a response from someone who had sent the message by accident. But a few seconds later, the phone buzzed again. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the new text, especially because it was the same number. The message read, "I'm still watching you." I sat up quickly, a wave of panic hitting me. I looked around the room, feeling a sudden sense of vulnerability. My apartment was locked, the blinds were drawn, and I was alone. So why did I feel like I wasn't? I had no reason to believe anyone was watching me, but the words on the screen made me question that. The silence in the room seemed louder now, oppressive, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to shake off the fear, telling myself it was just some prank, maybe even a spam text, but I couldn't ignore the creeping feeling in my gut. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone again, my mind racing for an explanation. "What do you want?" I typed quickly, trying to sound brave even though my stomach twisted in knots. I hit send and waited, feeling the seconds stretch out as I stared at the screen, hoping for something that would make sense. Another message came almost immediately. "I can hear you breathing." My breath caught in my throat. I quickly checked the window and the door, making sure everything was still locked. There was no one outside, no movement. But how did they know I was breathing? The thought sent a chill through me. I felt like I was being cornered, like I was the subject of some sick game. I wanted to call someone, but who? It didn't make sense. I didn't want to worry anyone without reason. So instead, I sat frozen, staring at the screen, waiting for more. I typed again, this time trying to demand some answers. "How do you know where I am?" I felt ridiculous even asking, but my fingers hovered over the keyboard as if trying to make the terror stop by confronting it directly. I hit send and waited. This time, the silence felt heavier, thicker, as if something was just out of reach, watching me. I didn't know how long I sat there, but every minute that passed made the situation feel more surreal, more real, all at once. Finally, the phone buzzed again. "You're not alone." The message was cryptic, and it only made my fear grow. I wasn't sure if the person meant they were with me, or if they were simply trying to mess with my head. Either way, I felt completely exposed. My eyes darted around the room again, looking for anything that seemed out of place, anything that would explain the overwhelming sense of dread creeping into my mind. But nothing looked different. Everything was as it should be except for the growing sense that I was being watched. I stood up, pacing around the room, my mind spinning. I wanted to leave, to drive to his friend's house or call the police, but I couldn't bring myself to do either. What if it was nothing? What if I just read too much into it? But the feeling wouldn't go away, the sense of being trapped in my own home with someone out there who knew more about me than they should. Another text arrived. "I can hear you moving." My breath hitched as I froze mid-step. I hadn't made a sound when I stood up. There was no way this person could have known I was pacing. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands, my heart thudding in my chest. I didn't know what to do next. I couldn't keep responding to this person that was feeding into whatever game they were playing. But ignoring them felt worse, like I was giving into their control. I decided to call someone after all, and I dialed my best friend's number. As the phone rang, I could barely hear the sound over the pounding of my heart. The seconds dragged by, and when she finally picked up, I exhaled with relief. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice groggy. I opened my mouth to explain, but before I could, I heard a voice whisper, soft and distant, coming from my phone. "She's talking to someone else." My blood ran cold. My friend hadn't said anything yet. The voice came from nowhere, and it was followed by a new text. You shouldn't have called her. My mind was reeling, and I hung up without a word, feeling more trapped than ever. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and bolted out the door, locking it behind me. I didn't know what was happening, but I needed to leave, needed to get away from whatever it was that had been watching me. The city lights outside didn't make me feel any safer. The fear didn't stop, it only followed. I didn't know who had been texting me or how they had gotten my number, but I knew I couldn't go back until I figured it out. Story 17. I was riding my bike home after a long day at work, the cool evening air brushing against my face. The streets were quiet, with only the occasional sound of distant traffic. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over everything, and I was looking forward to getting home and relaxing. The rhythmic sound of my tires on the pavement was almost soothing as I pedaled along, lost in my own thoughts. As I turned a corner, a car appeared next to me, pulling up beside me as I continued riding. It was an old, dark sedan, one I didn't recognize, and it slowed down to match my pace. I didn't think much of it at first, just a driver passing by, perhaps heading in the same direction. But something felt off. The car stayed right next to me, its engine humming as it kept pace with my cycling speed. I glanced over, and that's when I saw him. The driver was staring at me, a wide grin plastered across his face. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, as if studying me intently. His smile wasn't a friendly one, it was unsettling, almost predatory. It wasn't just the grin that disturbed me, but the complete stillness of his face, the way he didn't seem to be looking at the road ahead at all. He was simply staring at me, smiling as though he knew something I didn't. My stomach turned, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to focus on the road, my mind racing with a mixture of confusion and fear. Was this some kind of prank? Maybe he was just bored or trying to mess with me. I told myself to ignore it, to just keep riding and act like everything was normal. But it was hard to ignore the unsettling sensation that crept over me as the car continued to mirror my pace. I could hear the tires rolling steadily alongside me, the engine humming like a constant presence in my ear. Every time I glanced over, his grin grew wider, almost impossibly wide, as if he were enjoying the moment. I sped up slightly, hoping to distance myself from the car, but it kept pace effortlessly. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach, the sense of something wrong intensifying. My breathing became shallow, and I could hear the faint sound of the car's engine grow louder, as if it were closing in on me. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I was being cornered, like this man was deliberately trapping me in this strange dance. He wasn't making any moves to overtake me or pass, he was just driving next to me, watching me with that same eerie grin. I tried to ride faster, my legs pushing harder against the pedals, but the car matched my speed. The man's eyes were still locked onto me, and I couldn't look away. I had to do something. I thought about turning down a side street, trying to break free from this strange pursuit, but I wasn't sure if I could outrun the car. My pulse quickened, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. What if this was something more? What if he wasn't just messing with me? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. As I neared an intersection, the car suddenly swerved, cutting in front of me. It happened so quickly that I didn't have time to react. I slammed on the brakes, my bike screeching to a halt just inches from the car's rear bumper. My heart was pounding, and for a moment I just stood there frozen, staring at the car. The driver didn't move, still staring at me, his grin now wide enough to seem unnatural. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It felt like time had frozen, and I was caught in this strange moment, unable to escape. And then, just as suddenly as it had all started, the driver slammed the accelerator, and the car shot off down the street, speeding away into the distance. I stood there, shocked, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The sound of the car's engine faded into the night, but the feeling of unease lingered in the air like a thick fog. My hands were shaking, my heart still racing in my chest as I tried to catch my breath. What had just happened? Why had that man done that? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence almost deafening after the rush of adrenaline. I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me from a distance, but the street was empty. No one else had witnessed the bizarre encounter. I couldn't shake the image of that grin, that unsettling smile that seemed to hold some kind of dark secret. My mind kept replaying the moment, wondering what had been going through that man's mind. Was he just a prankster, or was there something more sinister behind his actions? I slowly began to pedal again, my pace slower this time, the fear still heavy in my chest. The streets, once calm, now seemed different. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something, every sound magnified in the stillness of the night. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting the car to reappear, but the street remained empty. The man was gone, but the unease he had left behind stayed with me, a constant weight that wouldn't lift. When I finally reached home, I locked the door behind me and checked the locks on all the windows. I felt safer inside, but the memory of that man's grin haunted me. What had he wanted? Why had he followed me like that, just driving at my speed? I couldn't make sense of it. I went to bed, exhausted but still shaken, hoping that the strange encounter would fade from my mind. But even as I lay in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The man was gone, but his presence lingered, a reminder that sometimes the world outside isn't as safe as it seems. Story 18. I had spent the afternoon running errands in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. It wasn't a bad area, just a bit quieter and less populated than where I usually went. The sun was starting to dip low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets. I was looking for a place to park where I could sit and clear my mind for a few moments before heading back home. That's when I found a secluded spot at the far end of a parking lot, tucked behind a row of old trees. The lot was nearly empty, save for a few cars scattered across the asphalt. It seemed perfect for some solitude. I parked my car, locked it, and sat there for a few minutes, staring out at the fading light. The calm of the moment helped me unwind a bit, but there was something about the isolation of the place that felt off. I couldn't quite place it, but it wasn't enough to make me leave just yet. After all, the day had been tiring, and I needed a break. I pulled out my phone, scrolling aimlessly through messages when I noticed the quiet. The usual hum of the city in the distance was oddly absent here. The trees rustled softly, but otherwise there was nothing. My thoughts started to wander, but just as I was about to put my phone down, I noticed something strange in the corner of my eye. A small white piece of paper was placed neatly on my windshield. I frowned, wondering if it had been there the whole time. I didn't remember seeing it when I parked, but I was sure it wasn't there earlier. I stepped out of the car, my feet tapping lightly on the pavement as I walked to the front. The note was folded in half, with nothing on the outside except a few faint creases from where it had been folded. It didn't look like it had been left by someone who had intended to hurt me, but the idea of a random note left on my windshield felt unsettling in this empty space. I reached for it, hesitating for just a moment before unfolding it carefully. The words were simple but striking. "You should smile more." I stared at the note, my heart racing a little faster. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost too perfect. The words were oddly familiar, but not in a comforting way. I had heard those same words from strangers before, usually in passing, a light-hearted comment to make someone feel better, or at least that was the intention. But here, in the quiet emptiness of the parking lot, it felt different. It felt more like an observation, or worse, an instruction. I looked around again, just to be sure. There was no one in sight. No one walking around, no cars passing by. It was just me in the parking lot, an eerie quiet hanging in the air. I felt exposed, as if the note had come from nowhere, written by someone who had been watching me. I quickly glanced over my shoulder to check if anyone was nearby, but the area was still empty. I tossed the note back onto the windshield, more out of frustration than anything else. Who would leave a message like that, and why here? Why now? It didn't seem to make sense. There were no other cars around, no sign of anyone who could have left it. I could feel my unease growing, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The quiet of the moment was suffocating, and the thought of lingering here longer made me want to leave even more. I got back into the car and started it up, the engine humming to life as I shifted the car into drive. But before I pulled away, I glanced at the note one last time. I should have just ignored it and driven off, but something about the simplicity of the words held my attention. You should smile more. The note was so innocent, yet it felt wrong. It wasn't until I started pulling out of the spot that I realized the angle of the note on the windshield had changed slightly, just enough for me to see the faint impression of another word beneath it. It was hard to make out, but there was definitely something there, written in a different slanted script. I stopped the car immediately and stepped back out. My hands were shaking now, but I couldn't leave without figuring out what the rest of the message said. As I reached for the note again, I noticed the change in the air around me. The temperature had dropped slightly, the coolness creeping in faster than it should have for that time of evening. I pulled the note closer, squinting at the faint marks. There, underneath the original message, was a single word: soon. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The word felt ominous, like a silent warning. Soon. What did it mean? Who had left this? Why would someone leave something like that on my windshield, as if they knew something I didn't? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the message was somehow meant for me, and that I wasn't supposed to be in this parking lot at all. I quickly shoved the note into my pocket, suddenly feeling very exposed, like a target. I got back into the car and locked the doors, starting the engine once again. My mind raced with possibilities. What did this mean? Was someone really watching me, waiting for the right moment? The thought of being followed was enough to make my skin crawl. I wasn't going to stick around to find out. As I drove away, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone behind me. But the streets remained empty, and I eventually calmed down, convincing myself it was just a strange encounter. But as I turned onto a quieter road, I couldn't shake the feeling that the words on that note were more than just a random comment. They were a message, a warning, and the worst part was that I still didn't know what it meant. Soon, what would come next? Story 19. I had decided to stop by the local store on my way home from work, just to pick up a few things. The store was quiet, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead creating a calm atmosphere. I made my way down the first aisle, casually glancing at the shelves as I searched for what I needed. There were only a few other shoppers around, and I didn't think much of it. But then, as I reached for a box of cereal, I noticed a man standing a few feet away, looking at a different shelf. I didn't think anything of it at first, people browse in stores all the time after all. But when I moved to the next aisle, I saw him again, standing at the end of the row, seemingly focused on a product on the shelf. I paused for a moment, my mind beginning to race as a strange sense of unease crept over me. What was the likelihood that he would be in 2 aisles at once? I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a coincidence. The store wasn't very large after all. Maybe he was just following the same path I was. I picked up a few more items, trying to focus on my shopping, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I turned a corner into a new aisle, there he was again, standing just a little too close for comfort. It wasn't that he was doing anything overtly strange, but there was something about his presence that felt unsettling. He never seemed to be in a hurry, just lingering, watching the same shelves I was. The third time it happened, I stopped in my tracks. I was in the canned goods aisle, looking for soup, when I caught a glimpse of him at the other end of the row. He was just standing there, not looking at anything in particular, his eyes fixed somewhere in the middle of the aisle. My stomach churned, and I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. It could just be a coincidence, right? He couldn't possibly be following me intentionally. It was a big store. There were plenty of aisles to shop in. I hurried to finish my shopping, grabbing the last few items on my list, but I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. The man had positioned himself near the far end of the aisle, not far from where I was. As I turned the corner to head toward the checkout, I looked back once more, and there he was, still watching me, though his expression was difficult to read. He wasn't smiling, nor did he look angry, just blank, as if he was waiting for something. My heart began to race as I reached the checkout, the cashier smiling at me as I set my items on the counter. I glanced over my shoulder again, and that's when I saw him walking toward the door, slowly and methodically, as though he had been waiting for me to make my move. My palms began to sweat as I paid for my items, my mind racing with thoughts of what I should do. It couldn't be a coincidence anymore, could it? I had to get out of there. I gathered my bags quickly and headed toward the exit, my pace quickening as I approached the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still behind me, following me as I walked toward the parking lot. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was overreacting, but every step I took seemed to be mirrored by his. As I pushed the door open, I glanced back over my shoulder, and sure enough, there he was, stepping out of the store just behind me. I felt a chill run down my spine, and my heart began to pound in my chest. I kept walking, pretending not to notice him, but every time I looked around, he was still there, walking the same path, maintaining the same distance between us. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't rushing to his car. He was just walking behind me, not saying a word. I quickened my pace, my anxiety growing with every step. I reached my car and fumbled for my keys, my hands trembling. As I unlocked the door and slipped inside, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man had stopped at the entrance of the parking lot, standing just outside the store. He wasn't moving now, just standing there, staring in my direction. His face was expressionless, his eyes hidden behind the shadow of his hood, but I could feel his gaze on me. I slammed the door shut and locked it immediately, my hands still shaking. I took a deep breath and started the engine, my eyes darting back to the man in the mirror. He didn't move. He just stood there, his figure growing smaller as I pulled away from the store. I couldn't bring myself to look away from the mirror, half expecting to see him following me, but the rear view was empty. It wasn't until I was several blocks away that I finally relaxed my grip on the steering wheel and let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The rest of the drive home was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been watched the entire time. My thoughts kept drifting back to that man, to the way he seemed to follow me so quietly, so deliberately, without a single word. I couldn't help but wonder why he had been following me, what his intentions had been. Had he been waiting for me to leave so he could follow me home? When I finally pulled into my driveway and parked, I checked the rearview mirror one last time, just to be sure. There was no one behind me. The street was empty, quiet and still. I grabbed my bags and hurried inside, locking the door behind me without a second thought. But even now, as I sit here, I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that store or that parking lot. I still find myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him lurking just behind me. Story 20. I had just finished a long day at work and was heading home when I made my way to the subway platform. It was late, and the station was unusually quiet, with only a few people scattered around waiting for their trains. I stood by the edge of the platform, checking my phone and trying to ignore the rumbling sounds from deep within the tunnels. The glow of the dim lights above cast a harsh, flickering shadow across the tracks. As the train's scheduled arrival time grew closer, the platform began to fill up, and I noticed a man standing behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was a crowded station, and it was common for people to stand close to one another while waiting for the train. But then I began to feel something unsettling. His presence was too close. I shifted slightly, inching my body away from him, trying to give myself some space. But no matter how much I moved, he matched every step, pressing even closer against me. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a crowded platform behind me, but instead the man was standing there, inches away, staring straight ahead. A chill ran down my spine. I took another small step forward, hoping he would take the hint, but when I did, so did he. It was as if he was mirroring my movements, stepping forward as I did, keeping the same uncomfortably small distance between us. I moved again, this time taking a larger step, my eyes darting around for someone, anyone who could intervene. The platform was still fairly empty, and the other people seemed oblivious to the interaction taking place. The man didn't say a word, nor did he make any attempt to engage with me. He just stood there, his gaze fixed ahead, never acknowledging my discomfort. I could feel my heart racing as I took another step forward, trying to create a barrier between us. But again, he moved in sync with me, his footsteps barely audible but unmistakable as he followed my every move. I could hear my breath quicken, and the faint sound of the approaching train became more distant in my ears. All that mattered was the man behind me, closing the gap with every step I took. The feeling of being trapped overwhelmed me. It was as if the man was toying with me, keeping me in this strange dance of movement, and I had no way of escaping it. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, and my hands began to tremble. I shifted again, this time turning slightly to see if there was another way to escape. But he mirrored my movement instantly. His eyes remained fixed ahead, unblinking, as though he wasn't even noticing what was happening between us. I tried to focus on anything other than the man behind me. I stared at the tracks, the empty tunnel ahead, as the sound of the train grew louder. Maybe I was just overreacting, I thought. Maybe he didn't realize how close he was standing. But every time I moved, he did too, and I knew deep down that this wasn't some accident. Something wasn't right. The train finally arrived with a screech of metal on metal, and the crowd around us began to move toward the open doors. I rushed forward, my anxiety surging. But the man was still behind me, following closely, pushing through the crowd as if nothing had changed. I glanced over my shoulder, but he didn't look at me. His eyes remained fixed ahead, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just following the crowd, but was still keeping his focus solely on me. I quickly entered one of the train cars, finding an empty seat at the far end, and settled into it, trying to calm my racing heart. The doors closed behind me with a soft hiss, and I glanced around to make sure the man wasn't following me inside. For a moment I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. But when I turned my head to look back at the entrance of the car, there he was standing just inside the door, staring at me. I froze. The doors had just closed, yet he had somehow managed to get on the same train. He stood there, still as ever, his gaze locked on mine. The train lurched forward, and I could feel my stomach twist with unease. I quickly averted my eyes, pretending not to notice, but I could feel his presence, his attention, pressing on me like an invisible weight. The train started to pick up speed, but my mind raced with thoughts of what I should do next. Should I get off at the next stop? Should I call someone? I couldn't bring myself to do anything. The man was still standing there, unmoving, as though he was waiting for me to make the next move. I tried to steady my breathing, focusing on the rhythmic sound of the train wheels against the tracks. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, his stare lingered. The train made its way through the dark tunnels, and I couldn't stop glancing nervously at the man. I didn't dare make eye contact again, but every time I looked up, he was still there, standing as though he hadn't moved a muscle. There was no way to explain it. It was as if he was following me with some sort of purpose, some strange intent I couldn't understand. I tried to shake the feeling, but it stuck to me like a shadow, refusing to let go. I stayed on the train, unable to shake off the growing sense of dread that gnawed at me. When my stop finally approached, I stood up quickly, trying not to make any sudden movements. My heart was pounding in my chest as I moved toward the door. I glanced over my shoulder one last time, but the man was still there, standing still as ever, watching me like he had been from the moment I first stepped on the train. The doors opened, and I rushed out, not looking back. As I hurried down the steps and into the crowded street outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still watching, that he was still out there somewhere. Even though I had escaped the subway, I couldn't rid myself of the eerie sensation that he was still following me, just waiting for the next time our paths would cross. Story 21. I was scrolling through my phone one evening, aimlessly browsing Facebook, when a notification caught my eye. It was a friend request from someone named exactly like me, my full name, my profile picture, everything. I paused, staring at the screen. There had to be some mistake. I didn't have any other accounts, and I certainly didn't remember creating a new one. I tapped on the profile, curious, hoping to make sense of the strange request. The profile looked just like mine down to the smallest detail. The picture was from a recent trip to the beach, a photo that only I had. The bio section had the same words I had written, and even the posts seemed to match. But as I looked closer, something was off. The photos were a little too perfect, too polished. They looked like the ones I'd shared, but they seemed edited, altered in ways that I didn't recall. There was a slight distortion to the images, as if they weren't really mine at all. My pulse quickened, and an uneasy feeling washed over me. I clicked on the friend request, contemplating whether or not I should accept it. I hadn't created any new accounts, so how could someone else have the exact same name, picture, and bio? I checked the mutual friends list, but there was nothing unusual there, either people I knew from work, school, old friends. The connection seemed legitimate, but it didn't feel right. A knot formed in my stomach as I hovered my finger over the accept button, unsure of what to do next. After a few minutes of hesitation, I decided to decline the request. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I thought I could put it out of my mind, but I couldn't stop thinking about the details. The profile seemed too real, too accurate, and yet something about it felt off, like it wasn't just a coincidence. What if someone had been watching me, copying me? The idea of someone out there mimicking my life, down to my profile picture, unsettled me deeply. Later that night, I tried to distract myself with work, but the thought kept creeping back into my mind. I opened my laptop and checked my Facebook account again, thinking maybe I'd find some explanation. But when I logged in, there was another friend request, this time with a message attached. It was from the same account. The message was brief, just a few words: "Why didn't you accept me?" I stared at the message, a chill running down my spine. It was as if the person knew I had seen a request, knew exactly what I was thinking. I immediately clicked to block the account, hoping that would be the end of it. But just as I was about to close the tab, I noticed something. The account was still there, still showing up in my suggestions list, as if it hadn't been blocked at all. I refreshed the page, but it didn't disappear. In a state of panic, I logged out of Facebook and changed my password, convinced that someone had somehow hacked into my account. I checked all the security settings, made sure everything was locked down, but the strange account persisted. It was almost like it was following me, lurking just behind my own online presence. I started to feel paranoid, like I was being watched, monitored. How could this be happening? The next day I received another notification, this time an email alert from Facebook. The message said someone had tried to log into my account from an unfamiliar device. My heart skipped a beat. Was this person trying to hack me? Had they somehow gained access to my private information? I immediately went into overdrive, changing every password I could think of, making sure to log out of all devices. But when I returned to Facebook, I was greeted with the same request: another friend with my exact name and picture, still hovering in the friend suggestion list. I tried reporting the account again, but no matter what I did, it wouldn't disappear. I was trapped in a cycle, unable to escape this haunting figure who had somehow invaded my online world. The feeling of being stalked grew, and I couldn't focus on anything for the rest of the day. I kept checking the account, seeing if it had changed or disappeared, but it didn't. I reached out to Facebook's support team, explaining the situation, but their response was vague. They said it might be a glitch or some sort of duplicate account, but they couldn't do much unless I had more information. I was left feeling helpless, as though I was fighting an invisible enemy. Every time I checked my phone, there it was again, the account staring back at me like some twisted mirror image of myself. The following week, the requests continued. The messages became more frequent, more unnerving. "You don't want to be alone, do you?" one read. Another simply said, "You can't escape me." I started to question my own sanity. Was I imagining all of this? Or was there really someone out there pretending to be me, watching my every move? I couldn't shake the feeling that the person knew things about me, things only I should know. In a desperate attempt to make sense of it all, I tried searching for the profile online. I used my name, my picture, everything I could think of, but no other account showed up. It was as if this strange copy of me didn't exist anywhere except in the digital spaces I inhabited. My own name had become a ghost, a shadow of myself, and I felt powerless to stop it. By now, the paranoia had seeped into every aspect of my life. I couldn't leave my phone unattended, couldn't log into Facebook without checking to see if the account had vanished. It was always there, lurking in the background, like a reminder that someone was out there, watching, waiting. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, a never-ending loop of dread. It seemed impossible to escape, as though I was being slowly consumed by someone else's version of me. One evening, I received a final message from the account: "We'll be together soon." I blocked the account once more, But this time, something changed. The request didn't come back. The account was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief, hoping that whatever this was had finally ended. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't seen the last of it. That one day it would return, and I would be left to face the version of me that wasn't mine at all. Story 22. I was driving down a long, deserted road just outside of town, the headlights illuminating the dark stretch of pavement ahead. The night was quiet, the kind of silence that felt thick, almost oppressive, as if the world was holding its breath. The air felt colder than usual, and the only sound was the hum of the engine as I drove, my fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. I had just passed the last of the familiar landmarks when I saw her. A woman stood at the edge of the road, her figure barely visible in the dim light. She was waving, her arm extended in a gesture that seemed almost frantic. It wasn't uncommon to see people stranded on the side of the road around here. This stretch was remote, and help could be miles away. My instinct was to keep driving, to maintain my course and not stop for someone I didn't know. But something about the way she waved, her posture, almost desperate, made me hesitate. I slowed the car, my foot easing off the accelerator. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but as I neared her, a strange sense of unease settled in my stomach. The woman didn't appear to be in distress, but the more I looked at her, the more I noticed how still she was. She wasn't just waving casually, it almost seemed as though she was waiting for me to stop. I glanced around, the road empty in both directions, and for a moment I wondered if this was some sort of trap. As I brought the car to a complete stop, I could see her more clearly. She was dressed in a long coat, her hair tangled by the wind, and she looked pale, almost ghostly in the moonlight. Her face was partially obscured by her hair, but her eyes were wide and intense as they locked onto mine. I rolled the window down just a bit, keeping my eyes on her as I tried to assess the situation. "Hey, can I help you?" I called out, my voice a little more nervous than I'd intended. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped closer to the car, the sound of her footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. I could see the dirt on her shoes and the slight tremor in her hand as she reached up to push her hair out of her face. There was something unsettling about the way she moved, like she wasn't entirely sure of where she was or what she was doing. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and before I could ask her again if she needed help, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A man stepped out from behind a tree, his figure appearing suddenly, like he had been waiting for me to slow down. He was tall and lanky, wearing dark clothing that blended into the shadows. His face was hidden in the darkness, but I could see the outline of his body moving toward the front of the car, his footsteps almost silent. I immediately tensed, my hand instinctively reaching for the door handle as I realized the situation was changing rapidly. The woman, still standing by the car, seemed to notice the man as well. Her eyes flicked toward him for just a moment, and then back to me. She didn't say a word. I felt the air grow heavier, the weight of the moment pressing in on me. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but it felt like I was speaking into a void. The man continued moving toward the car, his steps slow and deliberate. The woman took a step back, her gaze never leaving me. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. I wanted to drive away, to leave this strange encounter behind me, but something held me there. The man was getting closer, his presence somehow more menacing with each step. My heart was racing now, the pounding in my chest deafening in the quiet of the night. I glanced around frantically, searching for something, anything that could explain this bizarre situation. The man was close enough now that I could see his face, or what little I could make out of it. His features were sharp, almost unnatural, as though they had been carved out of stone. There was no warmth in his expression, no recognition of the situation, only a cold, calculating look that sent a wave of dread through my body. I looked back at the woman, her eyes still locked onto mine, but she hadn't moved. It was as if she was waiting for something to happen. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I drive away? Should I call the police? My phone was in the passenger seat, out of reach, and I felt a strange, almost paralyzing fear that I wouldn't be able to escape this situation. The man stopped just a few feet away from the car, and I could feel the sweat starting to bead on my forehead. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. The silence between us felt deafening, and yet I couldn't bring myself to speak. Suddenly, the woman took another step back, and I saw her mouth something silently. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The man didn't seem to notice. He was still focused on me, his eyes never leaving my face. I didn't know what they wanted or what was happening, but I could sense that it wasn't good. There was a feeling in my gut, an instinct telling me to get out of there. I slammed the car into reverse without thinking, the tires screeching against the gravel as I backed away from them. The woman and the man remained standing there, unmoving, watching as I pulled away. My heart was pounding in my chest, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I didn't look back, didn't dare to glance in the rearview mirror to see if they were following. The only thing that mattered in that moment was getting away. I drove for what felt like hours, the road stretching endlessly before me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't truly alone. The image of the woman's wide eyes and the man's cold expression stayed with me long after I had left the desolate stretch of road behind. Story 23. I had always been someone who left my bedroom door open. It wasn't out of any particular habit or superstition, but because it just felt more natural. I enjoyed the airiness of my room when it was open to the rest of the house, allowing light to spill in and the sounds of the house to echo around me. But when I got home that evening, I noticed something strange. My bedroom door, which I had left wide open that morning, was now closed. I froze in the hallway, staring at it. It wasn't just that the door was closed, it was the fact that I was certain I hadn't shut it. I always left it open. The feeling of unease slowly crept up my spine as I walked toward the door, my feet dragging as if they didn't want to carry me any closer. I pushed the door open, expecting to see the usual sight of my room, nothing out of the ordinary. But as soon as the door creaked open, a chill ran through me. The room looked the same, but there was something off. The air felt colder than usual, and the silence was thick, like the room was holding its breath. The window was shut and everything was in its place, but the atmosphere felt heavy, charged. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of disturbance. My bed was undisturbed, my desk was still neat, and my dresser was as I'd left it. But why had the door been closed? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had closed it without realizing, or maybe the wind from the open window had pushed it shut. But I knew deep down that wasn't the case. The door hadn't just closed on its own. It had been deliberately shut. The thought made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I pushed it aside. I had to be imagining things. There was no logical reason for my door to have been closed. As I stood in the middle of the room, something caught my eye. A small object was out of place on my desk, a paperclip. It wasn't unusual for me to leave little things scattered about, but this one had been bent in a way that made it look as though it had been handled recently. I didn't remember it looking like that before. I bent down to pick it up, my mind racing. Who would have been in my room? I hadn't invited anyone over. and I lived alone. I checked my closet just to make sure everything was in its usual spot, but the unsettling feeling grew stronger. My closet was as I had left it, with my clothes hanging neatly. But something was off. There was a faint smell, a smell that I couldn't place. It wasn't a bad odor, just something unfamiliar, like the scent of someone else's presence lingering in the air. I swallowed hard, feeling the anxiety start to rise. What was happening? Was I just being paranoid? I stepped back into the room, still feeling like something was wrong. My gaze swept over my bed, my desk, and finally rested on the door. I hadn't closed it, but someone else had. I was sure of that now. My pulse quickened, and I instinctively reached for my phone. I checked the time. It was almost 7 in the evening. There was no one else in the house. I was certain of that. I hadn't heard anyone come in or out. With my phone in hand, I texted a friend, asking if they had come by earlier in the day. No response. I checked the front door, half expecting to find it unlocked, but it was still securely closed. I walked back to my room, anxiety bubbling up inside me. I had to know what was going on. Was I losing my mind? Was I forgetting things? But as I stepped inside my room again, I noticed something new. The chair at my desk was slightly turned, facing away from the desk as if someone had been sitting there. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I didn't even recall sitting in that chair since the morning. My breath hitched. It was as though someone had been here while I was gone. Someone had been in my room, sitting at my desk, and had closed my door behind them. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe it was a simple mistake. Maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. But then I looked at my reflection in the mirror across from my desk. I froze. There behind me in the reflection I could see a shadow. At first I thought it was just the way the light was hitting, but as I turned around, the room remained empty. The shadow was gone. But I knew I had seen something. My heart pounded in my chest and I felt a cold sweat form on the back of my neck. I was not alone. I left my room and quickly checked every other room in the house, my footsteps echoing through the empty space. There was no one. I was alone, just as I had been when I left that morning. I checked the locks on every door, double-checked the windows, and even peered out the back door into the dark backyard. There was no sign of anyone. But as I sat on the couch, trying to calm myself, the unease wouldn't leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in my room, that someone had closed my door, rearranged my chair, and left without a trace. I tried to rationalize it, but nothing made sense. I hadn't invited anyone over. I hadn't heard anyone come in. So who was in my room? That night, as I lay in bed, the door remained closed, just as it had been when I returned home. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The room felt heavy, as though someone was watching me from the shadows. I pulled the covers tighter around me, but I couldn't sleep. I had no idea who had been in my room, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to leave my door open again. Story 24. I had just arrived at the hotel after a long day of travel. The lobby was quiet, with soft lighting and the faint hum of the air conditioning in the background. The front desk clerk handed me my keycard, smiled, and wished me a pleasant stay. I headed up to my room, feeling the exhaustion of the day settle in, eager to rest and refresh before a meeting the next morning. The room was exactly what I expected: clean, simple, and functional. I tossed my suitcase onto the bed and quickly unpacked, the soothing routine of setting up for the night helping me relax. I had a quick shower, ordered some room service, and then curled up on the bed, watching a movie. The comfort of the soft sheets and the calm ambience made it easy to drift off to sleep. A few hours later, I was jolted awake by the sound of my phone ringing. I fumbled for it in the darkness, still disoriented. The screen showed the hotel's number and I answered with a groggy hello. On the other end of the line, the voice of the front desk clerk was unmistakable, but there was an edge to their tone. "Hi, this is the front desk. We just wanted to check in and ask if you've let anyone else into your room." I sat up straight, confused. "What? No, I haven't let anyone in." I glanced toward the door, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. "Why are you asking?" I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. The clerk paused for a moment before continuing. "It's just that we've noticed your key card has been used twice, and we wanted to confirm. Our system shows the key was swiped a few minutes ago, after you checked in." The confusion in their voice was palpable, but it only made me more uneasy. "Are you sure no one else is with you?" I tried to process what they were saying. The idea of someone using my keycard without my knowledge didn't make sense. I was the only one with the card and I hadn't given it to anyone. "No, I'm alone." "That's impossible. I've been in here the whole time." I was starting to get irritated, trying to piece together what was happening. "Okay, sorry for the inconvenience," the clerk said, sounding more cautious now. "But we're just confirming for safety reasons. If you're sure no one else is there, we'll note it down." They didn't sound convinced, but the line clicked off before I could ask anything else. My heart was racing now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I lay back down, trying to ignore the anxiety gnawing at me. I reassured myself that it was just a mix-up. Maybe the system was glitching, or perhaps someone had mistakenly swiped the wrong keycard. But as I stared at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been in my room without my permission. The idea that a stranger had entered without my knowledge made my skin crawl. I lay awake for the next hour, listening for any sounds that seemed out of place. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant noise from the hallway made my pulse quicken. I eventually drifted into a restless sleep, but the unease lingered in the back of my mind. The next morning I went down to the front desk to inquire further. The same clerk from the night before was there, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About last night, was there any update on the keycard issue?" The clerk hesitated for a moment before responding. "We checked the system again, and there was indeed a second swipe of your card after you entered your room. But when we reviewed the footage from the hallway cameras, there's no one else in sight." They paused, clearly trying to make sense of it themselves. It's like the card was used by someone who wasn't physically there. It's strange. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the information. "You mean the keycard was swiped, but no one was in the hallway?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "How is that possible?" "We're not sure," the clerk replied, their brow furrowed. "It could have been a malfunction or a mistake with the system, but we thought it was important to check." They looked down at the computer, clearly trying to avoid my gaze. "We'll keep an eye on things and make sure it doesn't happen again." I was left with more questions than answers. The idea that someone or something could have used the card without physically being there made no sense. My mind wandered back to the night before, when I had heard the faint sound of the hallway door opening. Had I imagined it, or had someone actually passed by my room? The events of the night were starting to feel surreal. As I went back to my room, I couldn't help but feel like I wasn't alone. I checked the locks on the door twice, making sure they were secure, and then pulled the curtains closed tightly. But the lingering feeling of unease didn't leave me. Every sound seemed amplified, and every shadow in the room made me jump. I tried to shake off the fear, but it clung to me like a thick fog. By the time I checked out the next day, I had convinced myself it was all just a strange coincidence. But as I handed the keycard back to the front desk, I noticed something that sent a shiver down my spine. There was a small, handwritten note taped to the back of the card. It simply read, "Please don't tell anyone." I left the hotel quickly, my mind reeling with more questions than I had answers. The keycard, the strange message, and the inexplicable swipe all pointed to something that wasn't adding up. Something or someone had been in my room, and I would never know the truth of what happened that night. Story 25. I woke up in the dim light of early morning, the kind of grayish glow that only comes before the sun truly rises. The room was quiet, almost eerily so, with the stillness hanging heavy in the air. I stretched, a yawn escaping me as I pushed myself up from my bed. As my eyes adjusted, I reached for my phone on the nightstand, but my fingers met cold wood where the phone had been just a few hours ago. Confused, I blinked, thinking I had simply placed it somewhere else. But no, I distinctly remembered setting it on the nightstand before crawling into bed. I even remembered the way it buzzed once, notifying me of a late-night message just before I turned off the lights. My phone was not there now. A sudden unease crept into my chest. I glanced around the room, my gaze flicking over the dark corners, half expecting to see something out of place. It wasn't just that the phone had moved, it was the way it was placed. From where I was sitting, I could see it clearly now, resting on the far side of the room, next to the window, just a few inches away from the wall. The distance was too far for me to have knocked it off the nightstand in my sleep. I would have heard it fall, wouldn't I? There was no possible way I could have moved it that far without being conscious. My heart started to race as the thoughts swirled in my head, but I shook them away. Maybe I had moved it while half asleep, but that still didn't explain how I had gotten it all the way across the room. I stood up and walked over to it slowly, my footsteps hesitant as the cold floor creaked beneath me. The room felt colder now, even though the heat had been on earlier. I reached for the phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I picked it up. It was still unlocked, the screen glowing faintly, showing no new messages or notifications. I turned it over, half expecting to find some sign of who had moved it or why. But there was nothing. The strangest part was how calm the phone seemed, as though it had been placed there intentionally, like someone had simply set it down as if they were placing a book on a shelf. I frowned at the phone in my hands. I tried to brush it off as some weird sleepwalking episode, but the rational part of me refused to accept that. I had never sleepwalked before, not once in my life. So why now? And why the strange placement of the phone across the room? It didn't make sense. I sat back down on the bed, still holding the phone in my hands. My mind raced through every possible explanation, sleepwalking, forgetting I had moved it, some odd glitch in my memory, but none of them seemed to fit. The fact that the phone was on the other side of the room, just out of reach, unsettled me. I could feel my pulse quickening as I wondered if I was alone in the room. The walls suddenly felt too close, the silence too deep. Something felt wrong. I tried to distract myself, checking the phone for messages or any sign that someone had accessed it, but everything seemed normal. I opened a few apps, scrolling mindlessly, trying to force myself into a sense of calm. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that there was something lurking just out of view, hiding in the corners of the room. My eyes darted to the door, which was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it open. I always closed it before bed. It was a small detail, but it didn't sit right with me. I didn't remember leaving the door open. My throat tightened as I stood up again, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. I walked over to the door, closing it gently behind me, but as soon as I turned back toward the room, I froze. My phone was back on the nightstand. I hadn't even been gone for more than a few seconds. It was as if it had moved back on its own, as if it were mocking me. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't touch the phone this time. I didn't dare. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it. There was no way I could have missed it moving. I hadn't heard it, hadn't seen it, but somehow it was back exactly where I had left it. I wasn't imagining things, I was sure of it. Something strange was happening, and I couldn't explain it. I checked the time on the phone, the act of doing something familiar almost a comfort, though it didn't do much to ease my growing unease. It was just past 5 a.m., the room still dark and heavy with the remnants of night. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. Had someone been in the room with me while I slept? Was I sleepwalking, or was I just losing my grip on reality? I felt paranoid, almost like I was questioning my own sanity, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The idea of going back to sleep seemed impossible. The thought of lying in bed with my eyes closed, only to wake up and find my phone somewhere else again, was too unsettling. I decided to leave the room and go downstairs, hoping the quiet of the living room would help clear my mind. I took one last look around the bedroom, half expecting to see something out of place, but there was nothing, except the nagging sense that I wasn't alone. As I walked down the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence, I glanced back toward the bedroom door. My eyes narrowed. From where I stood at the foot of the stairs, I could just barely see the phone resting innocently on the nightstand. It hadn't moved, not yet, but I felt it would. Something told me I wasn't done with this, that the strange, inexplicable events weren't over. The question lingered in my mind: who or what had moved my phone? Story 26. I was lying in bed, reading a book, the soft glow of the lamp casting gentle shadows on the walls. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that usually made me feel comfortable, wrapped in the safety of my own home. I had just reached a particularly tense part of the novel when I heard it. A soft rustling sound, almost like fabric moving, coming from the direction of my closet. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. It wasn't the kind of sound that could be explained away easily, like the wind or creaks from the house settling. This was deliberate, like something or someone was shifting around inside the closet. I set the book down slowly, trying to listen more carefully. The rustling continued for a moment, then stopped. With a mix of curiosity and unease, I slid out of bed and quietly made my way to the closet door. My breath seemed louder than the rustling had been, and I felt the familiar sensation of goosebumps forming on my skin. The closet was dark, the door barely ajar, and I hesitated before opening it completely. Maybe it was just a trick of my mind, but the sound had been so real, so clear. I took a deep breath and slowly pulled the door open. The closet was filled with clothes, coats, jackets, dresses, all hanging neatly on their hangers. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing moved. I stared at the rows of clothing, waiting for something, anything, to give me an explanation. But the stillness only made my skin crawl. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the area, searching for any sign of what might have caused the noise. As I reached to touch the hangers, I noticed something strange. The clothes at the far end of the closet were swaying slightly, as if someone had just brushed past them. My heart skipped a beat. The air in the room felt heavier now, almost suffocating, and my throat went dry. I quickly backed away from the closet, feeling a chill run down my spine. There was no way the clothes could have moved on their own. I had been lying in bed, reading, with no one in the room, and yet, Here they were, swaying as if someone had just been there. I quickly closed the closet door, my hands trembling as I did so. My mind raced, trying to come up with a rational explanation, but none came to mind. I returned to bed, pulling the covers up tightly around me as if they could shield me from whatever had happened. I tried to convince myself it was nothing to draft, perhaps, or maybe the house settling. But the thought of the clothes swaying lingered in my mind, like a persistent shadow. I kept glancing at the closet, unable to shake the feeling that something was waiting just beyond the door. As I lay there, trying to push the unease aside, I heard another sound, a soft creak like a floorboard groaning under weight. My pulse quickened, and I turned my head toward the sound. It was coming from the direction of the closet again. I held my breath, straining to hear. The rustling noise was back, faint but unmistakable. I sat up in bed, my heart racing now, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Was someone in the closet? How could they have gotten in without me noticing? I had checked the door earlier. It had been locked. I couldn't stop my hands from shaking as I grabbed my phone and texted a friend, asking if they could come over. I needed someone with me, someone who could make sense of what was happening, because I was too scared to trust my own judgment. As I waited for a response, the noise from the closet grew louder. It was as if someone was moving around inside, shifting through the clothes, brushing them aside. The sound of fabric swishing filled the room, and it was all I could hear, drowning out everything else. My breath caught in my throat as I heard the unmistakable sound of a hanger moving, followed by a soft thud. I didn't wait any longer. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, flinging it open without hesitation. The closet was empty. No one was inside, and the clothes were hanging exactly as they had been before. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just happened, that someone had been there just moments ago. My pulse was still racing, my breath shallow as I stared at the empty space. I walked into the closet, my feet silent on the carpet as I stepped carefully over the threshold. I reached out, touching the clothes that hung in front of me. They were still warm, as if someone had just been standing here, brushing past them. My fingers trembled as I ran them over the fabric, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. But nothing made sense. It was as if the space had been disturbed and then quickly returned to its original state, like a memory that faded too fast to hold on to. I stepped back, my eyes scanning the closet one last time, searching for anything that might explain what had happened. But it was just a closet, empty, quiet, and unremarkable. I closed the door again, feeling like I was locking away something that shouldn't be contained. I could still hear the faint rustling in my mind, the echo of something I couldn't understand. I returned to bed, but sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of the swaying clothes, the feeling of someone just behind me. The house was silent again, but the silence felt different now, oppressive, heavy with the weight of whatever had just occurred. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. What had happened? Who or what had been in my closet? And why did it feel like they were still there, watching me? Story 27. I was home alone on a quiet afternoon, enjoying the peace and solitude. The house was unusually still, the kind of silence you only get when no one else is around. I was curled up on the couch, flipping through a book, when a faint sound broke the quiet, a soft click. I looked up, confused, as I realized it was coming from the direction of the front door. At first I dismissed it as nothing. Maybe it was the house settling, or the wind pushing against the door. But then I heard it again. Another soft click, followed by the unmistakable sound of a lock turning. My heart skipped a beat and I froze. The front door was locked. I was sure of it. I hadn't heard anyone arrive, nor had I been expecting anyone. My mind raced, running through all the possible explanations, none of which made sense. I hadn't heard footsteps, no cars had pulled up outside, and there was no reason for anyone to be at the door. My first instinct was to grab my phone, but before I could move, I heard the door handle jiggle, like someone was trying to turn it. My breath caught in my throat, and I stood up slowly, trying not to make a sound. I crept toward the hallway, my feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floors. The closer I got to the door, the louder the noise became, the soft scraping of metal against metal, the clicking of the lock being turned, as if someone was testing it. I stood at the end of the hallway, watching the door, unsure of what to do. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and I felt the cold sweat start to form on my palms. I glanced around the room, looking for something, anything, to defend myself with. But I wasn't sure what I was facing. Was it someone playing a prank? Or something much worse? I moved cautiously toward the door, hoping I could get a glimpse of whoever was on the other side. My hand was hovering near the doorknob when I heard a sudden sharp click, followed by a faint thud, as if the door had been nudged slightly. My breath caught in my throat, and I immediately backed away, my mind reeling with fear. There was no mistaking it now. The door had just been unlocked from the outside, and whoever was on the other side was trying to get in. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to bolt out the back door, run as fast as I could, but my legs felt like lead. Another part of me wanted to open the door and confront whoever was there, but that felt dangerously reckless. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. I could hear my own heartbeat, each thud louder than the last. Whoever was out there, they weren't making a sound now. I wasn't sure if they had given up or if they were just waiting for me to make the first move. I decided to check the door. With trembling hands, I slowly approached it, my back pressed against the wall as I reached for the knob. I held my breath and twisted it slowly. The door didn't open. It was still locked. But how? I had clearly heard the lock being turned, the unmistakable sound of metal shifting. My heart was racing as I stepped back and looked around the hallway. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows or signs that someone had been trying to get in. The door was still locked, and I was still alone in the house. I couldn't explain it. I tried to calm myself, telling myself that it had to be some kind of mistake, maybe the wind or the house settling, but my gut told me otherwise. I turned on every light in the house, checked all the windows, and double-checked every lock. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of being watched hung heavy in the air. I wasn't alone. Something or someone was here. I sat down on the couch, my mind racing as I thought about what to do next. The lock had clearly turned, but I hadn't heard any footsteps or seen anyone outside the house. I kept replaying the sound of the door unlocking in my mind, each click of the lock louder and clearer than the last. I knew I wasn't imagining it. Someone had been at that door, trying to get in. I picked up my phone and called my best friend, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried a few more times, but the same thing happened. Panic began to set in as I realized that I was completely alone, with no way to reach anyone. I wasn't sure if I should call the police. I didn't have anything to report. No one had entered the house, and I hadn't seen anyone. It was just the lock, just the strange sound of the lock turning. I decided to check the door one more time, just to be sure. As I reached for the handle again, I heard another soft click. The lock was turning, even though I was standing right there, staring at the door. I froze, my hand still hovering above the doorknob. The sound of the lock seemed to echo through the house, and then silence. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the door. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone was there. They were trying to get in, but why? What did they want? Why hadn't they just knocked if they were a visitor? I felt a surge of panic rising in my chest as I realized that I wasn't in control of the situation. The door remained locked, but it wasn't the lock that was making me afraid. It was the feeling of being watched, of knowing that I wasn't alone in my own home. I didn't wait any longer. I grabbed my phone and called 911, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened. They told me to stay inside and not open the door, that officers would be on their way. But the waiting was unbearable. Every minute felt like an eternity. I didn't know what was out there, but I was sure of one thing: I was no longer alone. Story 28. I was out for a walk, enjoying the cool breeze on a quiet afternoon. The sun was starting to set, casting a soft orange hue across the sky. I walked along the familiar path, taking in the peaceful surroundings, trees rustling gently in the wind, the occasional bird flying overhead. It was a typical evening, one that didn't promise anything out of the ordinary, but that was before the car pulled up beside me. At first, I didn't even hear it. The sound of my footsteps on the pavement drowned out the approaching vehicle. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the sleek black car slow down and pull up next to me, almost too close for comfort. I glanced over, a little confused, and saw a man behind the wheel. He wasn't driving fast, but he was moving in a way that made me feel like he was waiting for something. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively slowed my pace. The driver rolled down his window, and before I could even react, he leaned out toward me. His face was calm, his eyes intense, but there was something about the way he spoke that sent a chill down my spine. "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice smooth and deliberate, as if he had been expecting this moment for a long time. I stopped walking, unsure of what to do next. I looked at him, trying to make sense of his words. Had he mistaken me for someone else? I didn't recognize him, and I had never seen this car before. His face wasn't familiar, and I didn't think I had ever met anyone like him in my life. My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them made sense. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to gauge the situation. The air around me seemed to thicken, and I felt a sudden unease settle over me. I didn't know if I should speak or if I should just walk away, but I couldn't help but feel trapped, like the conversation had already begun, and now I was in the middle of it. I took a slow step back, my instinct telling me that I needed to distance myself from him. But the man didn't seem to move or make any indication that he was going anywhere. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. I didn't mean for it to sound as uncertain as it did, but the situation had caught me off guard. I wasn't sure if I should be worried or if I was just being paranoid. The man didn't immediately respond. He just kept staring at me with those cold, calculating eyes. The silence stretched on longer than I was comfortable with, and I found myself looking around as though there might be someone else nearby who could help. But the street was empty. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, and there was no one in sight. I felt a growing sense of dread that I couldn't shake off. "I have been following you for a while," he finally said, his voice low but clear. "I know where you live." My stomach dropped. I felt a rush of panic flood through me, my mind spinning with questions. How could he know where I lived? I didn't recognize him, and there was no way he could have been following me for long. I had just started my walk and I had been on this same route countless times before without incident. My thoughts scrambled for an explanation, but nothing seemed to make sense. The idea that someone had been watching me, following me, made my skin crawl. "I think you're mistaken," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice faltered. I took another step back, my hands instinctively tightening around my phone in my pocket. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I call the police? Should I run? My legs felt heavy, as though they were rooted to the ground, frozen in place by the sheer strangeness of the situation. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like he was amused by my fear, as though he knew exactly what effect his words were having on me. He didn't say anything more for a moment, just continued to watch me with that unsettling gaze. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. I finally managed to tear my eyes away from him, glancing quickly around the empty street again. There was no one else in sight, no cars passing by, no pedestrians walking on the sidewalk. It was just me and this stranger, and the silence between us seemed to grow heavier by the second. The only sound was the low hum of the car's engine. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what you want, but you need to leave." The man's expression didn't change. He just kept staring at me with that same unnerving calmness. After what felt like an agonizingly long moment, he finally spoke again, his voice colder this time. "You'll regret it if you walk away now," he said, his tone so calm it felt like a threat. "I've been waiting for this moment, and I'm not going anywhere." I couldn't take it anymore. My legs finally obeyed me, and I turned on my heel, walking as quickly as I could down the street. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the adrenaline surging through my veins. I didn't look back, afraid that if I did, I might see him following me. I didn't know how far behind he was, but I wasn't going to give him the chance to get any closer. As I walked faster, the fear that had gripped me started to shift into anger. Who was this man? What did he want from me? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped something dangerous, but I didn't know what. The thought that someone had been watching me, waiting for the right moment to approach me, made my skin crawl. I didn't know if he was still following me, but I wasn't going to stop until I was safe at home. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Story 29. It was late, well past midnight, and I had been putting off my laundry for days. The laundromat was nearly empty, which was exactly what I wanted. I never minded doing laundry at odd hours. Fewer people meant fewer distractions, and it was the perfect time to unwind after a long week. The hum of the machines was the only sound in the room as I sorted my clothes and threw them into the dryer. I had come to expect the quiet stillness of the laundromat at night. There were no kids running around, no couples bickering about whose turn it was to fold the laundry. Just the soft clatter of coins in the change machine and the occasional beep of a dryer starting up. I found it soothing. It allowed my mind to drift, to forget about work and the world outside for a little while. I was focused on folding a load of towels when I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the glass door of the dryer I was standing near. At first I thought it was just the usual distortion of light, but then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was someone standing behind me. A man. He was tall, his figure looming in the reflection, his face obscured in shadow. My heart began to race as I froze, trying to figure out if my mind was playing tricks on me. I glanced over my shoulder, but the laundromat was empty. The lights overhead flickered slightly, and the room seemed unusually quiet. I quickly turned back to the dryer's glass door and looked at the reflection again, but the man was still there, standing just a few feet behind me. His presence felt unnervingly close, though when I turned around, I could see nothing but the empty space where I had just been standing. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, my senses heightened now. I told myself it had to be some sort of optical illusion. Maybe the lights were playing tricks on me, or maybe my tired eyes were fooling me. Still, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was wrong. I continued folding the towels, trying to ignore the sense of dread that seemed to creep up on me. But as I continued to fold, I couldn't stop glancing at the reflection in the dryer door. The man was still there, standing just out of my line of sight. His figure was becoming clearer now, as if he were somehow growing more solid in the reflection. I could see that his face was now visible, though he didn't seem to be looking at me directly. Instead, his eyes were fixed somewhere to my left, his expression unreadable. I felt the weight of his gaze on me, even though I couldn't meet his eyes directly. It was as if he were waiting for something, waiting for me to notice him, to acknowledge him. The tension in the room was suffocating, and every nerve in my body screamed for me to turn around, to confront him. But I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor, my mind racing with confusion and fear. I quickly dropped the towels I was holding into the basket and took a step toward the door. Maybe I had been mistaken. Maybe he wasn't standing behind me at all, and I was just imagining things. As I walked past the dryer, I glanced at the reflection one last time. This time he was gone. The space behind me was empty, and the reflection was just that, nothing more than the image of a lonely laundromat late at night. But as I stepped toward the exit, I heard a faint shuffle of footsteps behind me. My pulse shot up, and I turned around instantly, my heart pounding in my chest. The laundromat was still empty. No one was there. The door to the laundromat was open, but no one had entered. I could feel the weight of something, an unseen presence, lingering in the air, but I couldn't see anyone. I rushed to gather my things, my hands trembling as I shoved the rest of my clothes into the bag. I could hear the faint sound of the footsteps again, growing louder, closer. Each step seemed to echo in the empty room. I didn't know whether to run or wait, but the decision was made for me when I heard the sound of the dryer doors slamming shut, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone breathing heavily. Panic surged through me. I knew I had to leave. I bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I fumbled for my keys. I glanced over my shoulder one more time, but the man wasn't there. There was no one in the laundromat anymore, no one in the reflections. I was alone. I rushed out the door and into the cool night air, the hairs on the back of my neck still standing on end. I ran to my car, threw my laundry in the passenger seat, and locked the doors as fast as I could. As I started the engine, I couldn't help but look at the laundromat one last time through the rearview mirror. The windows were dark, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from inside. I drove home as quickly as I could, my mind racing with thoughts of the man I had seen or thought I had seen. I tried to rationalize what had happened, convincing myself that it was just a trick of the light or maybe a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. There was no way I had imagined the man in the reflection. He had been real, too real, and whatever he had been waiting for, I had a horrible feeling that it wasn't over. Story 30. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when a notification popped up. A text message from an unknown number. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was either a wrong number or some spam message. I glanced at the screen. "Hey, are you home?" I frowned, unsure of what to make of it. It seemed like an odd question to receive out of the blue. I quickly typed a reply, "Wrong number." I thought that would be the end of it. The person would realize their mistake, and that would be that. But just moments later, my phone buzzed again. I opened the message and my eyes narrowed as I read the new text. No, it's not. My heart skipped a beat. That response wasn't just unexpected, it was unsettling. I sat there staring at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My mind raced. Who could this be? And why did they insist I wasn't mistaken? I hesitated before replying, trying to push back, the unease creeping up my spine. I'm serious, wrong number, I typed again, my thumb pressing the screen harder than necessary. My response was simple, but I was hoping it would put an end to the weird exchange. A minute passed, and my phone buzzed once more. The message was short, but it sent a chill through me. I know you're home. I stared at the words in disbelief. A surge of anxiety washed over me. How could they know that? I hadn't mentioned where I lived, nor had I given any indication of my location. I looked around my apartment, the room suddenly feeling much smaller and more suffocating than it had moments ago. I locked my phone and set it down on the coffee table, feeling the weight of the silence. For a moment I debated whether I should just ignore the messages and go on with my night. But something about the text felt off, too off to let it slide. My mind raced with possibilities, and none of them were good. It could be some sort of prank, or worse, someone who knew more about me than I was comfortable with. I picked up my phone again, quickly texting back, "Who is this?" I needed to know what was going on, who was behind the messages. I wasn't ready to jump to conclusions, but the strange feeling in my gut was telling me that something wasn't right. The phone felt heavy in my hands as I pressed send. I waited, holding my breath, hoping for a reasonable explanation. The response came almost immediately. "I've been watching you." My blood ran cold as I read the words. My breath caught in my throat. The anxiety that had been simmering now erupted into full-blown panic. I dropped the phone, the screen facing down, not sure what to do. The sudden wave of fear was overwhelming, as though I was no longer alone in my own home. I quickly picked up the phone and dialed a friend. As it rang, I paced around my living room, trying to steady my breathing. No one picked up, and I felt a deep sense of isolation. I texted the message to my friend instead, explaining what had been happening. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could reassure me this was nothing more than a harmless prank. But as I waited for my friend to respond, I felt an undeniable sense of dread. The apartment, which had been so familiar just hours ago, now felt like a maze of corners and shadows. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway or lurking just out of sight. I walked over to the window, peeking through the blinds, but there was no one outside. Still, the feeling didn't fade. The words kept echoing in my mind, "I've been watching you." I shook my head, trying to push the thought away, but it clung to me like a heavy fog. Maybe it was just a prank, I thought. Maybe it was someone I knew messing with me. But the nagging sense that something more was going on wouldn't let me go. I glanced at my phone again, noticing I had a new message from the unknown number. My hands trembled as I unlocked the screen. The message was brief but unsettling. "I can see you through the window." I froze. I hadn't even opened the blinds, and the apartment was on the second floor. There was no way anyone could be watching me from outside unless they were standing on the street. But even then, I didn't remember seeing anyone when I checked earlier. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of it. I quickly grabbed my phone and texted back, "How could you see me? Are you outside?" My mind was racing, my pulse quickening. I couldn't stop the fear that was building with every passing second. I wanted to reach out to the authorities, but part of me was still holding on to the hope that this was all just a misunderstanding, a prank, maybe even a glitch in the system. But the reply that came next left no room for doubt. "I'm right behind you." My breath hitched in my throat. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I whipped around, scanning the room frantically. My apartment felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing against me with each heartbeat. I didn't know what to do. I had to be sure. I grabbed my phone, my fingers slipping in my haste, and dialed the police. The dispatcher answered quickly, and I rushed through an explanation, telling them everything that had been happening. They assured me they'd send an officer to check it out. But as I stood there, listening to the muffled sounds of my voice on the phone, I noticed something strange. The air around me had grown eerily still. A cold chill swept through the room, and I felt a presence that wasn't there before. My phone buzzed again. I hesitated, almost afraid to look at it. But when I did, the message on the screen made my blood run cold. "I'm already inside.